Greetings and peace, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us this evening. And we have the honor and privilege of being joined by our brother Douglas Dietrich in the series of dialogues that we're having. Part 1 was about his background, World War II, and the occult satanic elements of the U.S. military. Part 2s and 3s collectively were on H.P. Lovecraft and Islam. And now Part 4 is going to be on satanic ritual abuse. And I'm so thankful to Brother Douglas Dietrich, who's also now a published author, and I recommend you check out his books, The Roswell Deception and the Demystification of World War II, which is on Skybooks USA. I will put the link in the description below. And this book will reveal the truth that your school history textbooks will not tell you. And I highly recommend you check out Roswell Deception and the Demystification of World War II. The second book, published by Brother Douglas Dietrich, is Vampirology. And Vampirology is also available on Amazon in both paperback and ebook format. And this basically teaches you the truth about the vampire subspecies from the main source itself. And it will eliminate the misconceptions that you have been implanted in yourself from movies, video games, and everything else. And, with that said, we start this with Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. In the name of God, the Beneficent, the Most Merciful. And I pray to God to bless my brother Douglas always with happiness, protection, and strength. And thank you, my brother, for joining us this evening.
Oh, the honor is mine, and God bless you. You are so generous and gracious, and you've been so patient. I want everyone to know we had scheduled this for about an hour ago, but I needed an hour's extra time to get my head back on my shoulders, as our man Salman Sheikh is well aware. It takes me a while to do that, and I look forward, of course, to our dear Salman Sheikh, hopefully, appearing back on my program more regularly, sometime in November, perhaps, towards the end, at the latest, maybe.
I'll be back by mid-November.
Wonderful, bless you. That is very heartening, and very. You have no idea how comforting that is. With that introduction, I do want people to understand that the book is of particular importance. I know that people may have had a hard time seeing it on the screen. When I noticed that when Salman was holding it up, the trick of the light made it very difficult to see the cover. So whether you can see the cover or not, understand that it's nonfiction, and understand, of course, that we need your help. Basically, there is no way that we have to market this book. So it's all dependent on guerrilla marketing. And it's very important that you make this purchase and you recommend this book to others, because this is your actual history of how America lost the Second World War to the Japanese Empire. Honestly, until you read that book and understand that America lost the war to the Japanese Empire, nothing in your world makes sense. Everything in your world has been senseless ever since World War II. People can't make heads or tails of it because they have no idea what really happened. So by explaining to the public what really happened, your world will suddenly make sense for the first time. And the context in which you're living will suddenly make sense. And from that point forward, we can all move forward. And I want to thank my man Salman for his patience in that. With that, we're going to go forward in this is going to be somewhat of a stream of consciousness for a little bit until I get enough oxygen to go into a zone. And what we're going to have Salman do is kind of help me with that. I think that one of the ways that we'll start is the way that I suggested. This is a subject that, first off, you're going to notice that there has been a lot in the media lately about victims of satanic ritual abuse, except they're portraying the perpetrators as the victims. And I don't know if Salman is familiar with this story yet, and we can go from there to a victim that we both know. And we've just kind of come into his acquaintance recently, and he'll serve as kind of like a springboard as to where we can go from here, because his story, even though we don't know that much of it, in a very real sense, there's not all that much of it we need to know to draw some conclusions. And but what I'm going to do is introduce our man Salman to a subject that's been going on recently. What I'm going to do is I'm going to ask Salman to do the same if he wishes. If he wants to keep his screen clear, that's fine too. But what I'm going to do is I'm going to enter the words satanic ritual abuse onto the search engine. And when I take a look at this term and I look it up on the search engine, the first thing that comes up is Wikipedia. And instead of an entry in Wikipedia, of course, Wikipedia is the first thing that comes up for anything you look up. And in case we have new listeners, the first thing we have to emphasize is whatever you do, whenever you see Wikipedia, you just move on beyond that. Don't stop to look at Wikipedia, ever. It's not worth your time. It is a waste of your time. And the most immediate thing I can say that takes some time to explain, but nevertheless is the most preeminent qualifier here, is that the individual that comes up whenever we speak of satanic ritual abuse will be an individual that will be exclusively dealt with, though I'll speak of him tonight freely, but we are supposed to be focusing on him almost exclusively with my interview, which will be dated tomorrow, and that'll be Saturday, the 30th of October on Halloween Eve Day with Penny Bradley, who will also be interviewed by Salman Sheikh. And Salman Sheikh can provide us the date and time he'll be interviewing Penny Bradley, and whatever he feels like talking to her about, maybe a completely different subject, but I'll be talking to her about Michael Aquino. And for those of you who don't know who Michael Aquino is, Michael Aquino is he was the founder of the Temple of Set, which was a preeminent true church of Satanism and the dark side. And he is someone who founded that church schismatically, meaning that he severed in schism in a doctrinaire difference from Magus Anton Szandor LaVey, who was the founder of the First Church of Satan, and that is how it's known. And so Magus Anton Szandor LaVey was known as the Black Pope of the First Church of Satan. And when he founded the First Church of Satan, he founded it in the spirit of the ultimate, what he felt was the ultimate logical conclusion of Judaic agnosticism. So to put that into perspective for you, when it came to the Jewish culture in Europe, the Karl Marx, who was not born Karl Marx, he was born with a very Jewish name, Rabbi Moas Levi. That was part of his name was rabbi. It wasn't his position. He was not a rabbinical scholar. He was not someone who was an actual rabbi. It was just a name, kind of like our man Salman Sheikh. His name Sheikh, although he is a real sheikh. Sheikh means teacher, and he is a teacher. He is not necessarily someone who is formally recognized as such necessarily by certain doctrinaire schools of Islam, and they would have a recognition for a certain kind of training, etc. And Salman, of course, is more along the lines of the tradition of the Sufis, and very much more along the lines of a kind of mystical enlightenment. And when it comes to the case of Magus Anton Szandor LaVey, he felt that the original foundation for where he was coming from was the atheism espoused by Rabbi Moses Levi, who was later Karl Marx. So Karl Marx was educated in Prussia, and he was also known as the Red Prussian. So he was by nationality actually a German, very similar to Henry Kissinger. And Henry Kissinger was ethnically Jewish, but his nationality was originally German. And he was considered a traitor to Germany because he left Germany to serve the United States, but ultimately was awarded the Israeli version of the Congressional Medal of Honor because he served Israel so well by making the United States, while he was in charge of American foreign policy, he made certain that the United States allied itself with Israel during the Six-Day War, which ensured Israeli victory. And so Henry Kissinger was awarded the equivalent of the Israeli Congressional Medal of Honor for that service to Israel, using the United States simply as a tool of Israel. So when it came to his cutting his teeth in terms of service to America, he was an interrogator of German prisoners of war. And so Henry Kissinger, who was ethnically Jewish but spoke very fluent German because he was raised and educated in Germany, was someone who was able to interrogate the Germans in their native language. And then when he came to the United States, well, he had already come to the United States and was a U.S. citizen at the time that he was doing that in World War II, interrogating Germans towards the end of World War II and during the occupation. When he was made the Secretary of State, ultimately, the way that he was able to run the American empire was during the time of the fall of Richard Nixon, just so that people don't think that this is empty Judeophobia, some kind of quote-unquote anti-Semitism, which is a very incorrect term. And because Semitic refers to Arabs, those are Semitic peoples. Jews can also be Semitic peoples, but only if they are Sephardim, which is generally of the bloodline of the Arabic peoples. So they're both genetically the same, but not the Ashkenazim, who are Eastern Europeans who are Turkic in their origins, because they were the descendants of the Khazar tribe, which was converted to Judaism by the Jewish form of jihad or crusade, what they actually spoke of, spraketh of, in the Jewish tradition as Holocaust, which is a term that came from their conquest of Canaan, where they burned the nation to the root in order to conduct a mass sacrifice to their god Yahweh. And when the Israelis conducted that sacrifice of all of the human beings on the land of Canaan to conquer it for themselves and claim it as Israel, they termed that holy war a Holocaust. That was their term for what the Muslims would call jihad and what the Christians would call a crusade. And during one of their Holocausts, they conquered the Khazar tribe and mass converted the survivors to Judaism, and from those we have descended the Eastern European Ashkenazim, which were for the longest period of time and still are the primary ethnic composition of the state of Israel today. So they are ethnically more Turkic, Caucasoid, as opposed to Semitic. And so when you speak of many Jewish people, they are of that bloodline. And to use the term anti-Semitic is a farce. So the term Judeophobic would mean someone who is pathologically afraid of or hateful of Jews. So that would be the correct term to use. And so that people don't mistake what I'm saying about Henry Kissinger as mere Judeophobia, understand that the British historical precedent was a man named Benjamin Disraeli, who effectively ran the British Empire. So when the British finally faced defeat at the hands of the Zulu Empire during the expansion into Africa, his government was overthrown. It was voted out of power. So until that period of time, it was acknowledged that in terms of secular power, the person who really ran the British Empire was a Jewish individual named Benjamin Disraeli. This is what happened to the United States with the scandal and the overthrow of President Richard Nixon. So Richard Nixon was facing enormous problems during his administration, and he managed to alienate the Arabs because he took America off the gold standard, which was established by Franklin Delano Roosevelt. Was Franklin Delano Roosevelt, to put that in some perspective just ever so briefly, he took America off the gold standard, which is often blamed on Richard Nixon. And what Franklin Delano Roosevelt put America on was the Bretton Woods monetary system, which, now that America was on a fiat dollar, that America could print at will with no end in sight because it had no basis in anything. It certainly wasn't based on gold. Then he could basically make it the currency of the world, because it was the only currency in the world that was truly fluid and therefore could be exchanged without any problem. And every nation in the world pegged its currency to the US dollar, except those that joined the Axis. That was the foundation of the Axis of Nations, was to resist pegging their currencies to the US dollar. That was the true cause of World War II. So when the Americans were able to establish a kind of monopoly on the currency system after World War II ended, without going into all of the details of World War II itself, when America was able to establish its monetary power over a great deal of the world through World War II and its alliance system, then at that point, they were running out of oil, domestic oil, or easily accessible domestic oil. And Franklin Delano Roosevelt held a summit with the king of the House of Saud and agreed to peg the US dollar to a standard, which was the oil standard. So every barrel of oil released by Saudi Arabia and later on all member states of OPEC would then be the basis for the value of the American dollar. It was called the petrobuck system. So when America was taken off the gold standard and placed on the petrobuck system, then America at that point became slave circuited to the output of Saudi oil and the oil of OPEC, the oil, which is an acronym, OPEC, for Oil Production and Exportation Cartel, and of which, by the way, the founding member was actually Venezuela, just so people know. And in the American hemisphere, that's why the Americans thought it was secure. They thought it was cool to peg their dollar to the outflow of oil because they figured, well, the biggest source of oil was actually Venezuela and the American hemisphere. And boy, did they ever fuck up with that. So that went communist ultimately. And it turned out they weren't producing very well anyway. And everything came out of Saudi Arabia. So they were really screwed and stuck with Saudi Arabia as their royal master and an effective Saudi administrative government. So Nixon wanted to free America from that, and he took America off the Bretton Woods monetary system, which meant he took it off the foundation of the petrobuck, and therefore he alienated OPEC, and therefore OPEC went all out to character assassinate him, and they took him down. This is one of the reasons for Watergate. But while they did that, that left Henry Kissinger in charge. In other words, even though Henry Kissinger was not president, he was Secretary of State. And even though Richard Nixon had a successor in the form of Vice President Henry Ford, there was a power vacuum while Nixon's ass was swinging in the wind and Henry Ford was yet to succeed him, during which time someone had to be running not the United States domestically necessarily, which was established by Congress. Congress was effectively running the domestic United States of America, but somebody had to run the American empire. And the man running the American empire worldwide at that time was Henry Kissinger. So he effectively ran America the way Benjamin Disraeli had run the British Empire until he lost a war to the Zulus, at which point he was overthrown. In the case of Henry Kissinger, he won his war, and America sided behind Israel, and they won the Six-Day Yom Kippur War. And after that, he was awarded the equivalent of the Israeli Congressional Medal of Honor. So the reason that that is significant is because you're talking about an individual who was of tremendous power and kind of a role model for Magus Anton Szandor LaVey, who felt that one of the original modern ideological founders of Western heresy, so that people understand this, understand that communist China today, communist Vietnam, communist North Korea, these are all Asian nations in the news that I cover very much on my own transmissions. And throughout this season of the witch, I'm dealing quite heavily with Asian geopolitics, because even though I'll be dealing with things like satanic ritual abuse and Michael Aquino with Penny Bradley and our man Salman Sheikh here, when I go back on Halloween, if I'm transmitting on Halloween night, Sunday night, I'll be going into Asian geopolitics, because frankly, I think that's just as scary as anything that's going on in the world of the infernal and the diabolic in terms of Halloween fright. But in terms of these communist Asian nations, all of them are following a Western heresy. They're the ultimate example of the westernization of the world. The westernization of the world was either a kind of capitalist conquest and colonization of many nations, or it was a communist westernization, because Marx is, after all, a product of Western philosophy. And so when Karl Marx began to establish Marxism, it was atheism, it was godless. And so you had this Jewish individual establishing a godless philosophy that came to conquer a great deal of the world's population and is now one of our primary problems on Earth to this day. We are still fighting communism, and we're in for another Cold War with communism. So we are stuck in this cycle created by Karl Marx. Now, a Jewish female from Russia named Ayn Rand. She came to the United States and established the philosophy basically called objectivism, but it is essentially Randism, and meaning Ayn Rand's philosophy. And so-called objectivism is simply a godless capitalism. So she was of this Jewish descent, and she was anti-communist because she came from a Tsarist Russian background where her family was wealthy enough in the Jewish Pale of Settlement, where despite all of the Judeophobic pogroms of the Tsarist Russia, which they escaped from by moving to the United States, Russia's fall to Marxism inspired her to conquer the United States. And she felt that since the Jews had conquered Russia with godless communism, she could conquer the United States with godless capitalism. In other words, capitalism was great, but get rid of God, get rid of faith in an almighty or any kind of divinity, and you will have true ruthless capitalism, which would be unstoppable. And so when it came to Ayn Rand, all that Magus Anton Szandor LaVey did as the founder of the First Church of Satan was take her philosophy of godless capitalism and he put it within a magical context. And so to him, since there's no God, there's also no Satan. And therefore, the closest thing to empowering yourself, his heretical idea, was to put faith in yourself. You could become as Satan. In other words, you could become as powerful as a kind of rebellious angel if you were to follow his magical regimen and take it upon yourself to empower yourself. So he felt that this was the ultimate logical conclusion of godless Judaism. That would overtake the world, would be a revolution in this new atheistic Satanism where there is no Satan out there. Satan is you realizing yourself. It's your full human potential. So it was really part of the human potential movement. That is what Magus Anton Szandor LaVey was presenting, was a new philosophy of human potential where you are the fallen angel and you are, as unto Satan, going to realize all of your powers through the magic that he could teach you. So that was simply, as he himself said, Ayn Randian objectivism with a magical, within a magical context. So hopefully that puts that in some perspective. That was the difference between Magus Anton Szandor LaVey and Michael Aquino. Michael Aquino said, well, I believe in a Satan that is out there, not within me, but out there, outside of me, that impacts our world. And so he, also there was another motivation. The other motivation was that Magus Anton Szandor LaVey, because he was atheistic, even though he founded the First Church of Satan, he was proudly paying his taxes. Because one of the things that Magus Anton Szandor LaVey felt was despicable was the fact that all churches got tax-exempt status in the United States, and he felt this was profoundly hypocritical because they were all money-making machines. And as money-making machines, since they were not paying taxes, he felt that they were criminal. And so one thing that he did was he said, well, we are a church, and he got legally recognized as a church, but he said, but we are paying our taxes. So he proudly paid his taxes, whereas Michael Aquino said, well, fuck that shit. I don't want to pay any fucking taxes. He said, I want a church where I keep my money to myself. So that was another motivation. So he, his church, however, the difference is that the Temple of Set is a theistic Satanism, meaning Satanism is believed in, that Satanism is an entity outside of oneself, as opposed to the human potential, insider nature, the nature of individualism within the original founding First Church of Satan of Anton LaVey. And so when Michael Aquino founded the Temple of Set, that is the context in which to see it, and it's also the context in which to see Magus Anton Szandor LaVey. One is of this kind of Judaic tradition. Understand that when it comes to the sense of how Magus Anton Szandor LaVey interpreted the world, he interpreted it in a very Judeo-centric sense, meaning that to him, as with many Jewish historians, the entire global history centers around the history of the Jews. And so to Magus Anton Szandor LaVey, who actually believed that Hitler was Jewish, he was one of the people who believed in that rumor, to him, no matter whether it was the communism of Marx, Karl Marx, or whether it was the Christianity of Jesus, the Christ, who he believed to be Jewish, based on the historical tradition of course, the Judaic background of Jesus Christ, he felt that whether it was Christianity or communism or Adolf Hitler, that all the world was simply a collision of Jewish philosophies. Do you understand what I'm saying? So this is how Magus Anton Szandor LaVey saw the world from the Judeo-centric perspective. That's all Jewish, whether it's Christianity or communism or Nazism. And that profoundly that Adolf Hitler, if he was this incredibly self-loathing Jew in the sense of Jesus, which is how Jews see Jesus, just so Christians understand this, Christ is the Jewish Antichrist, because Christ's, shall we say, Friedrich Engels, because just as Karl Marx, you never would have heard of him if it weren't for Friedrich Engels, because Friedrich Engels was the man who took Karl Marx and established the Marx myth. He basically divorced Marxian philosophy from Karl Marx himself, because Karl Marx himself was such a repugnant, repulsive figure who had all kinds of faults that everyone despised. What Friedrich Engels did was he took the philosophy and separated it from the man and created Marxism separate from Marx. And therefore you got this kind of ideological Engelsianism, an Engels philosophy or propaganda that then became the dominant interpretation of Marx, that became the ideology of communism worldwide. So too with Christ, whoever the man was, the majority of Christians are not, they're not following Christ so much as the philosophy of one of his apostles, Paul. So it was the apostle Paul who took, well, Christianity and separated it from Christ and created a kind of doctrinaire philosophy that most Christians are following. And of course, this was the difference between the church and people who were Gnostic. The concept of the term gnosis means knowledge. Gnosis means you're entering a state of intimate knowing, and this is the Gnostic desire to develop a personal relationship with Christ is very similar for Christians to what the Sufis are to Islam. So the Sufis to Islam are saying, I am developing a personal, intimate knowledge of the Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, as the messenger of Allah, the one true God. So too, the Gnostics of Christianity are in that vein. They're not people who are members of a church, they're people who are members of a faith. And they are developing an intimate, very personal relationship. And they're very hermetic, they're very monastic in that sense. Not monastic in the sense of monks living in a church, but hermetic in the sense of more like hermit, desert kind of dwelling sages. And indeed mages, because Christianity was very much like mystical Islam, very capable of magic. So when you separate from that to the church, you are no longer in gnosis. The church is in pistis, pistis meaning faith in the Latin. So the church is about faith. The Gnostics are these intimates who are trying to find knowledge in Christ as opposed to faith for the sake of faith. Someone who's in pistis or in faith, this is why you simply believe what the priest will tell you or what the imam will tell you, and you do not study yourself. You simply go to a church or a mosque to be lectured. And that would be someone in pistis or in faith. You are happy to accept what is told to you and let someone else do the intellectual work. So there's nothing wrong with that. I'm simply putting that in context and perspective. I mean, for God's sakes, who has time in their life? Your average person, especially was farming or working. Your average person has no time for intellectual pursuit of intimate knowledge with the creator of the divinity. So most of you are stuck with faith. This is, you have to take things on faith or society's not going to function and we're all going to die. So, except for the people meditating in the desert, like Salman Sheikh. Aside from all of that, yes, we come back to the people who are, now that I've disambiguated all of that, so we're stuck today with the concept of these Asian powers, just so I can plug my own show, listen to that on Wednesdays and Sunday nights, and that will be on the Douglas Dietrich channel, which you can find on YouTube. You just look up Douglas Dietrich on YouTube and you'll eventually find it. As a matter of fact, I think it's, well, let me just check and make sure, but I believe it's youtube.com/Douglas Dietrich. As a matter of fact, it is pretty much that, except with a little letter C in the middle. It's youtube.com/C, as in the lowercase. It's got to be a lowercase c. Everything else can be uppercase, but that C's got to be lowercase. youtube.com/C/Douglas Dietrich. Then you'll hear me talk about the Asian geopolitics. But what we're dealing with is, in the end, the westernization of the world as manifest in these communized Asian powers, because Marxism is simply a Western heresy. So that is to be borne in mind. And when it comes to everything else, I think people have got a fairly clear view of that. And so what happened with Michael Aquino was that he ultimately, after establishing and administering the Temple of Set for a very long time, he ultimately severed from the Temple of Set, and that is because that was mere Satanism. The real enemy that he fell to, the real conversion that he ultimately undertook, because he realized after all of his years of research and investigation, was the kings of Edom tradition. And this was, of course, the tradition of the real enemy of all creation, of all divinity, the anti-gods, who are not of the divine creation, but are truly antithetical to all creation, of which Lucifer, the fallen angel, Tavush Malek, is a part of. Because the real balance that one discovers is that Satan, that Lucifer, is of the cosmic design, that Satan, that Lucifer is part of the cosmic ecology, and without that evil, there is no good. Without that, all of good and evil, all fortune and misfortune, ultimately is of the divine. And once you understand that, then you are at peace. But when it comes to the anti-gods, this is something that seeks the destruction of all of that. It sources from nihilism. And that nihilism ultimately sources from the atheism, the disbelief in anything divine. And that's what can ultimately lead one down the path towards the kings of Edom, from nihilism that all creation does not matter, that all creation can be uncreated. And this is what we have been explaining when we were explaining Howard Phillips Lovecraft, who, as I've presented, spoke from a position of, as a secular Muslim, to be disambiguated from a cultural Muslim or a practicing Muslim. Of course, so people understand that just briefly, without going deeply into H.P. Lovecraft, you can review our past episodes for that. And the episode in which we put it all together, that is on both Salman Sheikh's channel and my own. Thanks to John Warrington, who did that. John Warrington is, of course, the Maggot Man, and he has his own Maggot channel and his channel on Odyssey.com, which, just so that people understand how important he is to us, let me make certain that people know about him, and just look a little bit up here. All right. Yes, John Henry McMills Warrington. He would be on YouTube at youtube.com/C/Magator, which is spelled MAGGOTAUR. And of course, you will find our episode on either my channel or Salman Sheikh's channel, the episode that puts all of our past interviews together, or you can find it on Odyssey.com at Maggot:E, meaning Odyssey, ODYSEE.com /@ Maggot, MAGGOT. and then the colon, and then E, and put a slash after that. And so that'll make certain you get to Odyssey.com, the maggot channel, and you might have a hard time working it because it's very difficult for some people to work with, but if you can make it work, then it helps him out because it gives him credits by which to publish more shows. So aside from that plug for John Warrington, the Maggot Man, we will now go back to the subject at hand, which is satanic ritual abuse. This is some context for it, and one of the things that brings us back to it is Rocco Fowler, kind of, who is this wonderful guy, as far as I can tell. I don't know him very well. He's, but I can tell you one thing: he's the real thing in terms of being a victim of persecution and a victim of gang stalking. He is, he's all fucked up. The best thing I can say is that he'll present evidence that I find quite compelling, that they're still fucking with him every day. And then the question, which it'll take Salman to help me explain, as Salman says, it's the nature of the beast we're dealing with. The first question that would come to my mind when I take a look at how this guy's being fucked with is, why? I mean, the guy's at the bottom of the fucking barrel. He is at the end of it all. He's at the, he's just this side of homelessness. He is barely able to express himself. And so and yet they are putting energy into harassing him, stalking him. And it's like, to think of the time and energy invested in that when this individual's obviously not a threat to anyone, and by his own description of what he's done in life, the biggest threat he is to himself, and yet they spend yet they relentlessly stalk and harass him, and so you're left. It blows your mind. I mean, so Salman, if you've got any extra perspective on that, then I'll take it from there as to where we are at today with the concept of satanic ritual abuse and what came up. That'll bring us back to what came up when I looked up who they are saying the victims are, and I'll talk about the Wikipedia again because that's important. It brings Michael Aquino back online. So go on with what you know about what your impressions are with Rocco, and let people know you'll be interviewing him.
Yes, Brother Douglas, of course. All the links that Brother Douglas mentioned, I'll put them in the description below to support his channel and John Warrington. And with Rocco's situation, it is a case of somebody who has been abused his whole life. He talks about the things that he experienced growing up, being in a ultra-conservative religious environment, being abused, and basically kind of broken down in many ways. And also what he saw with his mother, with these different men coming into his mother's life, that kind of traumatized him. And then growing up, his experience, he relates it to basically being somebody that's abused as a quote-unquote super soldier, or what Brother Douglas describes as a super victim, because that's what he is. He's a victim. And to this day, he has had people who has entered into his life. He let somebody into his home that tried to, I believe, put his other half, his spouse, against him, and tried to create that division between his life and his spouse, which he's fixing that now. And he's having people pretending to be military recruiters coming into his life and saying, hey, when do you want to join? Where he's not in any mental or physical condition to join the military.
Of course, most people who are in the military are not either, but that such being said, he's even worse. Yeah.
That's right. And it's so bizarre that he has people showing up at his door. And, you know, the good thing about Rocco, he documents everything. So whatever he says, he provides the evidence for it. And that basically shows, like, to this day, whatever this individual went through from his childhood, stuff that he saw with his religious upbringing and seeing his mother in different situations, him growing up, being targeted and abused and used by others, and even some names that he mentioned from the so-called super soldier community who were doing these kinds of tactics against him. So it's interesting to this day, this nature of this animal that we're dealing with is anti-godly in nature, where they will not rest until they have completely destroyed you, whether you're physically or mentally or emotionally capable of even not fighting back against them anymore. They just won't rest because that is the nature of the animal. They want to destroy all creation. And Brother Douglas describes that in a very beautiful way, that the aspect of what the Holy Quran says, that we test you with both good and evil, and to us you shall be returned. So both good and evil are from Allah, God, the cosmic design, Iblis, Lucifer, Malik Taush, Allah, Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him. All of this whole conglomerate is with the divine perspective. Now, what we're dealing with and has targeted Rocco too is of an anti-godly nature, where they don't care if that man has been broken down his whole life and he can't even resist anymore. These entities, I won't even call them beings, they won't rest until they have destroyed every part of creation, both good and bad in this world, and destroy that cosmic design of the Creator, which I thank Brother Douglas Dietrich that he is our Vulcan interventionist against this evil, and why people need to listen to him and take heed to what he's saying, because this is not his war, this is our war. And the way that I see the world right now, I traveled all over the world. I've been to England, America, here, Pakistan. I've seen how this anti-godly design is destroying this whole world right now. And it's so much disconnect, so much misery that people are in. And we all need to educate ourselves and come together and realize what's going on in the world, whether it's you're here in America or not. What Brother Douglas describes with the geopolitical situation in the Far East, that all of it is collectively impacting you. You have to take it seriously, and it is our collective war. And we have to show love and support to our brother Douglas Dietrich, who his whole life has also been dealing with this enemy, this anti-godly enemy, who has done nothing. As you see in his transmissions, as soon as he opens it up, there's like dozens of dislikes right away. And it shows you what kind of enemy that we're dealing with. And you need to support him, donate to him, get his book, support him morally, financially, subscribe to his channel, even to the very least, put a like on his videos to counteract against the enemy. Every effort is commended by the divine for your struggle against the enemy. And that's exactly why they're not just targeting Rocco, but all creation, because we are in their way, and they won't rest until they destroy us. But I'm thankful to Allah for putting Brother Douglas Dietrich in our lives in this pivotal time right now for the human race. So I thank you, my brother, and I give you my love, my prayers, and all the blessings of the Sufi path.
Bless you. Thank you so much, and I deeply appreciate that. To put some context with what our man Salman Sheikh is saying, two things. The first point, when he talks about as soon as I start a live stream, every time I start a live stream, which is at 8 p.m. Eastern Daylight Time, and of course, everyone remember, by the time this video is out, we'll still probably have about a week or so left, but by next Sunday, we are going back on standard time, and we fall back by an hour. This is all based on wartime, so that people understand that daylight saving time is wartime. You can look that up. It was originally established and enforced for only a single year in World War I, when American expeditionary forces were overseas across the Atlantic in Europe, and the public revolted, and they took America off of wartime until Franklin Delano Roosevelt established himself as dictator when he ascended to power in the same year as Adolf Hitler, 1933, only he was this side of the Atlantic, and he reestablished America immediately on wartime. You can look this up and verify it yourself. And this is why your biorhythms are discombobulated and all fucked up twice a year, because it takes half a year to get back into rhythm before they fuck you up again. And all of this is done to prevent you from revolting because you're too enervated, too exhausted, too lacking in sleep to organize. That's one factor. The other factor is quite really, quite legally, we're still at war with the Thousand-Year Reich in exile. As a matter of fact, what you're at war with is my native true homeland and heartland, my native Taiwan, because they are considered the last bastion of Hitlerism on Earth. And by Article 42 of the United Nations Charter, in lieu of a constitution, the United Nations has a charter. Understand the United Nations was founded in January 1st of 1941, just 2 weeks and 2 days after Pearl Harbor, essentially, on December 7th. It was only a few weeks and days later, on January 1st of the next year, that they formed it was 1942, January 1st of 1942, they founded the United Nations on-site, the Presidio military base where I worked for almost a decade, and destroyed many of their documents. But you can still find that fact if you research it. You can find that the United Nations was established on-site, the Presidio military base in San Francisco. And if you were to ever visit San Francisco, you would still see in the BART station in San Francisco a sign that says United Nations Plaza. If you look for it, and you will also find there's even a store named the United Nations Store in San Francisco. It's a ratty little corner store, like a $5. You would never believe that that was the remnants of what was once the United Nations Store. It is now privately owned, doubtless either by an immigrant from Pakistan or Afghanistan, but some Afpakia region dude owns it now, and it's just in the middle of the Tenderloin ghetto. But these are remnants of the reality that once was. The point being that it was organized as a organization of war, and its charter is a war charter. And just as in World War Zero, the first global war sourcing out of Europe, the Napoleonic conflict, in which America sided with France and lost its ass because the British ordered the Canadians within British dominion to invade the United States. And they invaded the U.S. and burned down the White House, which at that time was pink and known as the Pink House. When the Canadians did that, the Americans lost World War Zero. The War of 1812 is what the Americans call it, but it was part of the greater Napoleonic Wars. And after that, the Americans were very leery of conflict with Europe. And but during World War Zero, during the Napoleonic Wars, when the Allies declared war against America and France, its first ally. Understand, your first and oldest ally was not the goddamn Brits. It was France, because they helped America against the British Empire. So that's why America sided with France. Get it? That's the whole logic here that nobody remembers because they don't know their fucking history, and they grow up thinking that America and Britain were always incestuous allies or something. But when the Allies declared war against America and Napoleonic France, they declared it as a war against the person of Napoleon Bonaparte. They did not declare war against the nations of America and France. They declared war against Napoleon Bonaparte as an individual. This is the same with World War II. You may not know this, but if you look it up, you'll find it's all true. The United Nations declared war against the person of Adolf Hitler rather than against the Axis nations. All Axis nations were considered simply extensions of the person of Adolf Hitler. The last Hitlerite nation on earth is my Taiwan, which is considered an enemy of the United Nations, which is why we are not recognized by the United Nations. And technically, you and all the United Nations are at war with us, the island of Taiwan. But you can't defeat us because we're the most technologically advanced nation on Earth, which you can look up yourself if you don't believe me, and you will find all evidence that that is true, because all of your fucking microchips come from Taiwan, the overwhelming majority, enough to the point where I can say, as a general statement, all of them. So when it comes to where we're back at with the other point that, let's see now, that our man Salman brought up, he was talking about, say, for instance, a number of things, but getting back to Wikipedia, one of the things that Salman Sheikh knows, and he can probably put a link to that up on his own timeline. If not, I will find that link for him right now. And basically, one of the things that people need to realize, and you'll probably hear some noise here till I turn it on mute. I'm going to go to my own channel here, so everybody be patient with me. And so let me see now. It will be on the episode, which, shit, I'll have to go to videos to dig it up. And on this episode is where I put the link up to the fact that, here, you'll hear some noise for a second. There we are. I preempted that. Okay, so when it comes to Michael Aquino, understand that we have a link here that I'm going to hand to our man right now, Mr. Salman Sheikh, in the Facebook Messenger. And this link is something that is all anyone needs to see. Our man Salman Sheikh will integrate this link into his summary, his episode summary beneath this episode that you're listening to now. And this will explain all you need to know about Wikipedia. This is where Wikipedia emphasizes articles for deletion on Michael Aquino. And it points out that Michael Aquino is a major Wikipedia contributor. And therefore, he is to have all articles about himself deleted. Not only deleted, but they use the term salt, meaning that they will be scrubbed permanently from the internet, all reference to Michael Aquino. And so all of this is based on his contributions. And there you have it. I note that Michael Aquino is a Wikipedia contributor. For those of you who don't know, they're understating this severely. Michael Aquino helped create Wikipedia. He was one of its founding fathers. So Michael Aquino is, everything you read on Wikipedia is tainted by Michael Aquino. He was the man who approved what went up on Wikipedia. And this is the most cited reference in the fucking Western world right now. So understand this is why, it's one of the reasons why, that anyone who goes to school, no matter what grade you are in, whether you are in elementary or whether you are in the, yeah, nobody can see that, Salman. It just looks like a white screen. No worries. Good try. Good try.
I'll put it in the description below so everyone can know what Brother Douglas is talking about. And it shows you, the proof is right here about Aquino being a Wikipedia contributor and why you should heed Brother Douglas Dietrich's word and knowledge that why you should not take this source seriously.
Thank you. Thank you. And beyond that, take a look at what I've said about school. No matter what grade you're in, whether it's elementary school or whether it's postgraduate, Wikipedia is not allowed as a reference in any school reports. Yeah, it will discredit you if you use Wikipedia as a reference source. That is one of the reasons why. So understand that when I look up satanic ritual abuse, the first thing that came up was Wikipedia. But what's notable, and tell me if this is what happens with yourself, Salman, what's notable is that what comes up when you enter satanic ritual abuse on Wikipedia is not the term satanic ritual abuse. The term that comes up is satanic panic. And that is a very specific term that by its very nature claims that satanic ritual abuse does not exist. In other words,
I got the same thing, Brother Douglas, and it over on the top, it gives you a disclaimer that if you enter satanic ritual abuse, it redirects you here.
Yes, thank you. Thank you. So there you have it. There's Michael Aquino controlling your information intake. As an information consumer, Michael Aquino is putting this shit into your mind's eye and straight into your brain. You know, when I used to do armed security contracts at what they these days would call house parties, back in the day, we called them raves. And I'm sure Salman Sheikh is familiar with raves because the term originally was English. It was a British term. And so a rave house party would not only, they also called them block parties. A rave would be where the teenagers took over either an entire structure or they took over an entire city block. And so the structures that they would take over would not just be some house, okay, even though they call it house party. It'd be like warehouses. These would be like big facilities that they'd be partying in because no mere house could hold this shit. It would trash the house. So in San Francisco, they would take up like airplane hangars down south of Market and shit. And so these kids would be heavy drugging to the point where, since there was nothing the city could do to stop them, the city just literally arranged for the police to cordon the area off. And when they cordoned the area off, they would have the fire department park ambulances all up and down the street so that they could pump the kids' stomachs. So because the kids are drug up so dangerously, that they would die unless they got stomach pumped in many cases. And so the ambulances would be right on scene to pump the kids' stomachs. And this is how serious these parties were. These people were down there to forget the world and party till they blew their minds. One of the things I would see them do would be to take eyedroppers, and in the eyedropper would be liquid ecstasy. And they would use that to put the liquid ecstasy into their eyes because it would go straight through the optic nerve into the brain. And this was how they got the ecstasy directly into their brain without the blood brain barrier getting in the way. And instead of it being ingested and digested and thereby ruining, or somehow not ruining, because you can get plenty high off ecstasy just by digesting it, but without cutting the effect of the ecstasy, by putting it straight into your brain, they were literally blowing their minds. Well, that's what you do when you go online. Every time you go online, that shit from cyberspace is going directly through your optic cortex into your brain. You are doing exactly what those kids did with ecstasy. That misinformation is going straight into your brain. And so that's Michael Aquino is in your head when you go to Wikipedia. Understand that. That's why you can't look at Wikipedia anymore. Just don't look at it. Just don't open it. And so when it comes to what we're dealing with, the problem is this is what you get when you look things up. And so then underneath that, I don't know if this is what comes up for our man Salman Sheikh, but underneath that, what comes up for me is Slate.com, The Real Victims of Satanic Ritual Abuse from Slate Magazine. That's the second thing that comes up for me. And if you open that up, basically, they're talking about these two perpetrators who went to jail because they were raping kids. And what it says is, oh, yeah, and it's got the headline Medical Examiner. In other words, this is like this is supposed to be like medical journalism. This is supposed to be like medical journalism. So it says the dangers were imaginary, but the consequences were not. And it shows all these shadows of the children and parents pointing at some poor fuck in a prison outfit. And basically it says, among the atrocities that Francis and Dan Keller were supposed to have committed while running a daycare center out of their Texas home, drowning and dismembering babies in front of the children, killing dogs and cats in front of the children, transporting the children to Mexico to be sexually abused by soldiers in the Mexican army. By the way, all of this is true. These people did all of that. And I don't know if you know what happened, Salman. Do you know what happened to these people?
Yeah,
I mean, the adults, the accused. Do you know what happened to the accused? Dan and Francis Keller. Do you know what happened to them?
I believe they did go to prison, Brother Douglas, but eventually over time they were freed. And it just goes to show you the unfortunate system that we're dealing with is these people have all the immunity. It's, you know, individuals like yourself who are fighting for the truth, giving the truth. You are not being given the justice you deserve. But these people who are doing what they're doing, they did go to prison, and of course, they were freed. And that is the nature of the beast that we're dealing with.
Thank you. But it's beyond that. Just to explain to Salman Sheikh the enormity of this, what happened was not only were they freed, as in let go or released, what happened was that the judge did something unprecedented. By the way, you cannot legally, in the United States legal system, you cannot legally declare anyone innocent. That term is not a legal term. You are either guilty or you are not guilty. Those are the terms that are used. So when someone is released, they are declared not guilty. The judge, for the first time in legal history, this is a legal precedent. They were released just recently. I mean, effectively just yesterday for all intents and purposes, just within the last few days. And, you know, it was January, of course, around that time that this process began. But, you know, they were fully released this year, not but a few months ago. You know, for all intents and purposes, I think like a historian, to me, that's like yesterday. And when they were released, the judge said, I shall declare them innocent. This is the first time that term has ever gone into the historical record. No one has ever been declared innocent. This is something you would do for Jesus Christ. This is something you would do for an angel on earth. No one is innocent. That is, by the way, that's the definition of the law. You may not be guilty, but no one is innocent because we're all adults and we are, of course, by Christian law. Don't forget, this is the West, this is Christian, and all our law is based ultimately on the Bible here in the West, here in America. All of our law is essentially ultimately biblical in nature and Mosaic in extension. So this force, from that concept, you're all guilty of original sin. In other words, man is born guilty with original sin. That's the Christian concept. So in other words, this man is saying that these people are divine, that these people are literally like Jesus Christ, that they are gods on earth by declaring innocence. Do you understand what I'm saying here? That's the implication based on our Christian roots in America. So in America, what he's saying is that we need to worship these people. That is what he's saying. And these people are guilty of, it goes on from there, dressing as pumpkins and shooting children in the arms and legs, putting the children in a pool with sharks that ate babies, putting blood in the children's Kool-Aid, cutting the arm or a finger off a gorilla at a local park, and exhuming bodies at a cemetery, forcing the children to carry the bones. All of this is true. First off, no child has the capacity mentally to creatively extend beyond a certain level of fantasy. They do not have the intellectual or creative capacity to say, we were taken south of the border to be raped by Mexican soldiers. That's not something a child can conceive. That's literally inconceivable to a child. First, the concept of an international border, an international boundary, is something beyond a child's capacity to extend into a private fantasy, and then to carry that further to say that we were raped by members of that nation's foreign army is beyond the capacity of a child to even come up with. This requires a formulation that is beyond the intellectual or creative capacity of a child, period. So all of this is along those lines. Your average child, no matter what their flight of fancy, there's only a certain level of morbidity that a child can literally conceive either, because a child has a limited attention span. The limited attention span is going to go to various things like, oh, one moment they're up, one moment they're down, one moment you see this yourself. If you've ever had children and you're at the fucking, theme park, you're at the amusement park and you've been there all day and they have limitless energy, you don't. And you could treat them all day to the cotton candy, the rides, and then they want to go on another and another. And then finally, at some point, you break down and you say, oh, no, we're going home. And then they're saying, no, I want to go on that ride. And then you say, no, we're going home. It's over now. And then they're like, I hate you. Okay, so that is that momentary attention span. It doesn't matter what you've done for them in that moment. They hate you. But that's transitional. That goes away by the time you're home and they're eating dinner, etc. Of course, it can stay for some kids who are psychologically disturbed for a period of time. But then again, there is still a limit. It may last a little longer in some kids, a little shorter, but they don't have the mental or emotional energy to expand, because even though they've got limitless energy, they don't have that kind of energy, the discipline. They don't have the discipline to maintain focus. So because of that, at some point, their mind goes elsewhere and they forget they said they hated you. You see what I'm saying? So there's no way your child can focus enough on morbidity constantly where the fantasies are consistently morbid, where the fantasies are consistently violent. It's just not the way the child's mind works. So, by the way, for those who don't know, while these people were released, all of their former students have advocated that they not be released. So their former students are still very much aware of what they did, very much afraid of these people. But not only were these people declared innocent, the government gave them millions and millions of dollars, and they are multimillionaires. So they won the lottery. So what time they spent in prison, which was 21 years. They spent 21 years in prison. They got paid back. You know, if you worked at a job for 21 years, you would retire with a couple $1,000. So these people, without working a day in their lives, were fed by you on your tax dollars, given 3 hots and a cot. They were fed 3 times a day. They were given completely free medical care that they never had to pay for. And they were given, well, shelter. They were never in the rain. They always had a roof over their head. And then when they were released, they were given millions of dollars. I would take 21 years in prison for millions of dollars. That's an easy trade. You work 21 years in a job all your life, and you're going to come out with fucking nothing. You're going to be barely able to pay the rent. You're going to wonder how you're going to live the next day now that you're not working when you work 21 years. I would gladly trade 21 years of my life to become a multimillionaire. That's the smallest price in the world to pay, and you didn't even have to work for it. That's so these fuckers were like, it was like winning the lottery for them. So understand this. This is what we're faced with, and they're made heroes. They're made heroes. Not only that, you're basically told that they are divine and that you should worship them, and by all the logic that I've already articulated. So, and they're called the real victims. The real victims, which today a victim is a hero status. The victims are in at this point. Victimization is in. So this makes them heroes. So understand this. This is what you get when you look up satanic ritual abuse. You get satanic panic, and you get the real victims of Satanism are the practitioners of pedophilia and child abuse. So this is what we are left with. Now, here's another link I can provide to our man Salman Sheikh, and this link is something that your average person is not going to find on a search, and I'll give this to him in Messenger as well. And so that link will take him to essentially, I don't know if it's a PDF, a portable documents formatted file, but probably is. I think it's a portable documents formatted file. But in terms of what that is, it's at the head of the file. It's the National Library of Medicine, which is, of course, archived by the National Center for Biotechnology Information. So this is pubmed.gov. So this is a place where you can publicly access medical documents. And so this particular medical document is housed or categorized under child abuse and negligence. And this is 1997. So we're talking about in November of 1997, what they're talking about is children's religious knowledge, and the subtitle is Implications for Understanding Satanic Ritual Abuse Allegations. And one of the things that you see in the conclusion is right up there in the abstract. The conclusion says, our results suggest that children do not generally possess sufficient knowledge of satanic ritual abuse to make up false allegations on their own. That simple. And so even though they qualify that, the only thing they can say is that if some story is being made up, it means that somebody might be coaching them or guiding them at the absolute worst. But that doesn't even say that. It's just leaving that open to that. It is simply leaving it open to that. But the fact is, in all of these cases that they all claim are not true, the adults do not do that. They're responding to the child coming home and reporting what's happening to them. And then the adults simply take it from there in terms of reporting it, because the children cannot report it. This is the problem. Since the children cannot report it, then the adults report it, and then they are considered the people who are the conspirators feeding this to their children. By the way, no adult wants to do this because your average adult has to work for a living. They don't have time to do this. They don't have the energy to do this. It is something that is too much of a risk, because if they're proven to be liars, it ruins their career, it ruins their reputation. The only time an adult would do this is because their child is seriously hurt. This is usually based on injuries that their children carry home with them. Also catching diseases. And you know what usually happens? I'm not going to ask this rhetorically. I will answer it for Salman. I'll ask it of all of you. Do you know what usually happens to these adults who bring forth the injuries on their children, the fact that their children have contracted sexually transmitted diseases, all of this gets blamed on the adult reporting it. And they said, well, you hurt your children and you infected them with sexually transmitted diseases. That's what they will tell them. So your average adult becomes victimized as well. The entire system protects the pedophile, the pedopredator. All of this is the true conspiracy. So when it comes to satanic panic, quote unquote, that's all you're going to find when you look up satanic ritual abuse. So this is the beast we're fighting against. This is the true beast system. And this is what you're trapped in. And the biggest problem is also not to take it from the perspective of, shall we say, evangelical Christians, because they take it from a perspective that is not going to help. Their perspective will not help you if you're trying to deal with this problem. And of course, as I've told people before, I try to discourage people from researching this themselves with any agenda to try and, quote unquote, stop the problem. Your agenda is simply to educate yourself and educate others. The best you can do is really turn as many people as you can to consult with myself in terms of what I've shared on the media. That's not to consult myself therapeutically. I cannot help you therapeutically. I don't have time for that, but rather to consult my videos on the subject, to consult what I've said about the subject. If enough people become educated in that, that will help us all. And that's really the best you can do. The majority of people who try to do something on their own, you will ultimately make yourself a target. You will ultimately make yourself miserable, and it will destroy your life. And you'll wind up like Rocco Fowler. And at that point, well, you know, at that point, unfortunately, it doesn't stop. As you can see with Rocco Fowler, it just keeps going. And then the biggest problem is, you know, nobody will tolerate you. At that point, you know, everybody will find you needy and everybody will turn away and you'll lose all your friends, etc. It's just not the life to live. So this is something that also concerning the law, so that people understand this. And obviously, one of the things that a lot of people have heard about in the past was the prosecution of people like these this couple released in Texas. These two subhuman pieces of shit. When you take a look at their names, Francis and Dan Keller, people talk about how they were persecuted. You know, rather people don't even talk about how they were persecuted anymore. Rather, they would say how they were persecuted as opposed to prosecuted. If you get what I'm saying. If I said the term persecuted, you know, or prosecuted, where once they were prosecuted, now everyone thinks that they were persecuted. So while presenting them as victims, you might ask, how did they get arrested in the first place? Or what kind of evidence was used against them that didn't work, say, elsewhere or on other cases? And of course, understand that all of this has to do with the fact that the law, at one point, for a very short period of time, recognized the reality of satanic crime. And then all of that was wiped out from the legal textbooks. All of that was wiped out from all of the police manuals. Now, a young lady who approached me, and then basically I couldn't say no to her. And believe it or not, it wasn't simply because of her sexual charms, though I know it's easy to go there, and that was part of it. But really, that was just the cherry on top. The fact was, there was this one lady named Lena Shea, who is an Edomite cultist, who basically came into my life, and at a time when I was very in dire fiscal need. And I had a dental problem that I could not pay for. She paid for my dental repairs, and then she paid for things that I needed, like a mattress to sleep on. She paid for a toaster oven that I needed to eat. I mean, basically, this woman provided me with things in my life that were absolute necessities. I could not say no to her. So understand that this is something where this is the kind of problem that I've had being a public informant. When you're a public informant, nobody pays you to be a public informant. If anything, you're blacklisted from employment forever. So when she came and did that, she was, of course, setting me up to the point of ultimate dependence so she could get me knocked off social media. She ultimately got me banned from Facebook, and ultimately had my original YouTube, one of my other YouTube channels, erased, etc. All of this could never have been reestablished without John Warrington, the Maggot Man. For those of you who don't know, he has that nickname because in Celtic culture, Irish and British culture, they use that term as someone who's looking for attention, like somebody who's dancing on the tables at a party with a lampshade on their head. They say, "Oh, he's acting the maggot." Okay, so that's where that term comes from. That's the spirit in which his nickname comes from. But in terms of one of the things that Lena Shea did was she found online the old PDF of the occult crimes that was used for police. In other words, a police manual on occult crime. Of course, there was an element of that PDF that was excised, was censored, which was not done by her. It was like whoever put it online made certain they took out a certain part of that manual. They excised a part of it, but the rest of the manual was there. But it goes to show, how did she run across this PDF? I mean, how did she even know about it and then find it? You know, I'll have to dig it up at some point, but you know, then I'll send a copy to Salman Sheikh, of course. But in terms of that, I might look through, let me see if I can find it just briefly now. Probably won't find it. Oh, let me see. I got the fuck is this? Okay. By the way, everybody gets to hear me now while I look through my own mail here, and I'm receiving something like a confirmation of purchase, and I hope it's something I actually purchased. Yeah, God knows. I have no idea. This is probably something from that. Anyhow, at any rate, I have no idea what it is. But let me see if I can look up Lena Shea PDF, and that would, of course, it'd be Lena Crane PDF. And if I can find it, then that's great. And okay, if not, I'll find it eventually. But here we are, Occult Crime Handbook. I can't believe I fucking found it. There we are. So let me fast forward this to our man Salman Sheikh. And let me see, and let me see if I got his thing going on here. Salman Sheikh would be, okay, yeah, there we go. And so your email address has got the 911 in it, right?
Yes, that's correct. Salman Sheikh 911@gmail.com.
There we are. And so I've just sent this out to Salman Sheikh. And you can tell me if you've received it. Actually, what it says here, bizarrely enough, it says gmsil.com. Is that correct? Or I don't know if that's going to reach you. Tell me if it gets to you or not. It says the message was sent. But yeah, if you get it, let me know. And so aside from that, we'll find out. So in terms of the person who made that a reality, the person who gave us the inside info on occult crime, believe it or not, one of the people who originally worked with the San Francisco Police Department as a forensics photographer was Anton Szandor LaVey. And so it was around the time of the Korean War that Anton Szandor LaVey was eligible for the draft. And Anton Szandor LaVey decided he was going to evade the draft. Oh, you got it?
I'm just trying to look through the files here. No, I don't think I received it. Is it at gmail.com? Salman Sheikh 911@gmail.com?
No, what it said there was this somebody's trying to prevent you from getting it, because the interesting thing is, as soon as I entered it, some voodoo shit came up where it said gmsil.com, Salman Sheikh at gmsil.com. So let me try that again. And okay, let me change this. And so okay, let's try and enter this. Sol, okay, and Salman Sheikh, okay, at gmail.com. By the way, my appreciation for everybody's patience with this. And let's see if this, now let's make certain that PDF is attached. And okay, here we are. The interesting thing is, I'm not quite sure if okay, I'm pressing the send button, and that's the only way we can ascertain as to whether it's going through with it. Let's see if this goes through with it. I bet you the fucking thing doesn't go through. But that, I mean, I bet the PDF is not going to be in there to go through. See if it comes through the PDF at all. This is really irritating. And it goes to show where we're fucking at with this shit. Okay, so how do I do this? Let's see if I can. Okay, here's what we're going to do. Let's try this. Go direct here and see if this works. Okay. See, can you access it through there? I just put it inside of your... Fuck no, it goes straight to the Gmail. All right, how do we do this? This is going to be... You know, this is such a problem. I hate this world.
No worries, Brother Douglas. You could send it to me later. Please continue with your information.
Honestly, it's so frustrating. I want you to go on for a second and, you know, tell me, you know, take us a little bit onto a direction here while I solve this problem, because this is going to haunt me later. I'm trying to just fucking find a way to maybe download this. And let me see, how do we do this? Open with Google Docs, print, we got download. Here we are, download. And let's see where this winds up.
You know,
Safe.
It's interesting, Brother Douglas mentions this while he gets that sorted out. I've seen individuals like that where he has dealt with these Edomite women coming into his life. And
then,
you know,
go on. Yeah, without the romance, but go on.
The system is so it's so deep and evil that they'll use individuals from your past, present, and future whom you'll know to be, I guess they'll know you'll have that kind of trust between each other, and they'll use them against you. I had that done to me where they tried to use, like, girls that I had went to high school with, I guess now as adults, they use these assets against you, where I guess when they flip their switch on, they try to kind of break you down mentally, spiritually, emotionally, by making you feel neglected, by making you feel like there was some kind of love there, but then again, they just kind of break it all down at the last minute, because their job is to morally just to destroy you, so you stop doing what you're doing. That's why, you know, Brother Douglas realizes in a lot of my pictures I wear the shirt, "You can't stop me," because I have the power of God behind me. And that's what we do. We have that faith, and we let these people know that no matter what they try to do, it's like with Brother Douglas's situation with these Edomite women coming in, and also men in terms of coming in and offering help and all this stuff that goes on. And at the end, they just show who they are. And that's exactly what it is. You just have to know how to educate yourself on this. Like Brother Douglas said, that you have to, in order to defeat this enemy or this situation that we're dealing with, best thing you could do is educate yourself. And by educating yourself means realize patterns of elements of your past, present, future, or suddenly I haven't seen this person in 10 years and they're reaching out to me out of nowhere. What's going on? And then after they're done with you, they're nowhere to be found, because then their switch has been flipped off, and then when it gets turned back on, that's when they reach back out. So you have to realize what these patterns are in terms of like the entities and the beings that you're dealing with. And it's such a sophisticated system that it's basically you got to know the intuition of what's right, what's wrong. And Brother Douglas, in one of his transmissions, in his monologues, explained this in such a beautiful manner about listening to the teachings of the heart, where we follow the gut instinct, but we forget to basically honor our heart. And there's a Japanese video game. Of course, the Japanese always tell you the truth. The game called Kingdom Hearts, where it tells you about how all of our hearts that are connected, and the importance of trusting your heart. And if you see the Sufi symbolism, you see the Islamic crescent inside of the heart with the wings around it, flying towards the heavens, towards Allah. So that's basically the goal of the Sufi, is to connect with the heart. What Brother Douglas Dietrich has shown us too is to connect with the heart. And then this enemy that you're dealing with, your job is to basically break the human heart, break your soul, break your spirit, by putting these people in your life thinking that they love you, and boom, they turn on you in the last second. And it's me when I'm going to plane.
By the way,
I prayed for because. Yeah, do you hear me?
We seem to hear you now. Whatever glitch was going on there for a while seems to.
Well, you see, they're interfering with this transmission. So
they are. By the way, have you gotten the email? It has no subject, but it does have the PDF. So that finally I was able to get that to you. And what our man Salman said is absolutely correct. What they're trying to do is break your heart by repetitive imposition of people who quote unquote help you, and then of course turn on you. And certainly in my case, he's been a personal witness to this, and he knows of course that I was in no position to say no. It wasn't simply my need in terms of finances. It was also just technologically, I'm a product of the 20th century. I just had a 55th birthday on October 20th, and when it comes to what I'm used to, what happened was that in the 20th century, I grew up so impoverished, there was no ability for me to be educated in terms of use of a computer. You have no idea what a ride it's been to get to the point where I have the computer I have now. And I still didn't think we were even going to be able to transmit, or I wouldn't be able to host transmission with the latest transmission. It was a miracle I got on. I had to keep restarting the computer because the computer essentially was not interfacing with the keyboard. It was just not working. And so I had to keep not restarting, because restarting would just glitch forever. I had to shut the computer down by force. I had to forcibly shut it down and restart it multiple times. And this is because I've got a cheap computer, but even though it's new, it's cheap, and it still doesn't have all that much RAM. It's a Tera, but it's like all my life when I was trying to learn how to use computers, I went to City College, took computer courses. It's meaningless. It's meaningless because you're talking about they only had these old computers to work with. You're working with computers nobody uses anymore. So it was like then when friends would try to help me by saying, oh, let me give you a computer, it was always an old computer. And the old computers were not what anyone else was using anymore. So then when it got to the point where, I had somebody, in this case, Robert Lacey, a former baseball player, who was just trying to pose as a friend and was just, basically he was really trying to isolate me and get my attention so like I could cavort with him on a personal level. And I just was unable to do that for him. So he ultimately had a brand new computer he didn't send. And this is what people do. They use things as like some kind of hostage. But the one time he gave me an older computer, it didn't even have enough RAM on it. Not even enough memory on it to hold the online broadcasting software so that I could host my own program on YouTube. I mean, this is how old this fucking computer was. I mean, this was like my whole life was like this. So I had to get into a position where I finally got a computer, and then you were working with people who were actively Edomite, like the man who owned the last radio station that I worked at, Mike Ringley, where when we purchased a laptop, or rather my manageress at the time, Laura Lee Solomon, purchased a laptop for me using her money. And she had to dumb it down and take it off of a certain Windows because we couldn't work with the old Skype that Mike Ringley was using. If you can imagine this, Mike Ringley was using an old model of Skype that was no longer in use. And therefore, you couldn't use it using modern Microsoft Windows 10. You had to go back and dumb down your computer so that it would work with the old Skype that he had, or you couldn't be on his radio station. And therefore, the computer was useless for anything else. It was like this was the situation I was constantly trapped with. So the only time I've recently started using a computer was, we're talking about just like last year, basically. Last year, certainly. So I'm talking about 54 years of age before, not only that, but I'm finally able to produce for myself at all. And so when I needed people to produce for me, before I got the ability to run the online broadcasting software, etc., these were always people who were out to sabotage myself. For some guy named Pavel Edward, who later on, it was identified by Michaela Gregorich, God bless her. She found out that basically, because Lena Shea got me blocked off Facebook, got me banned off Facebook, and so you had this Edomite chick get me banned off Facebook, and then so I had to use Pavel Edwards' timeline. And then I found out from Michaela Gregorich, she found out he was using, because I took over his timeline, had my face on it, had my name on it practically. And he was using that same timeline, because it was his timeline, to befriend young boys. He was using it to seek out young boys and befriend them. So we're talking about a pedophile, Pavel Edward in Canada, Toronto. So that all of you know out there, Pavel Edward is a pedophile who lives in Toronto. And he went to jail for it, just so everybody knows that. He had spent time in jail. They had to put him in isolate. He spent time in jail in isolate so the other prisoners wouldn't beat him up because he was a pedophile. There you go. This is the kind of shit we're dealing with. And of course, how could you know that? You need a producer. You have to accept that. I was not in a position to say no. And by the way, that was the same case with Mike Ringley. He had some guy who was producing for him. It turned out the guy was a pedophile, and then they busted the guy. And so on all of the alternative media, you're going to find out all these guys show up as your producers, and they're all pedophiles. And then, of course, it's meant to reflect upon yourself. And of course, I would say that in Mike Ringley's case, it reflected it a lot more accurately, but there we are. In the case of where we're at now, after that, it was Derek Talley. And Derek Talley was saying, I got cancer and I need money. And then, now I'm on dialysis and I need money. And, we're raising money for it. Turned out he had none of this shit. I mean, and then had to get rid of his ass. It's just, and all of this, it reflects on you because what they're trying to do is make it look like you're unreasonable. They say, see, Douglas Dietrich is unreasonable. Everybody he won't work with them, right? He's getting rid of them all. But no, these people, as Salman Sheikh can attest, who was through the whole wild ride, he sees these people come and go. And yeah, they come and say, I'm here to help you. And I can't say no. They do that when I'm not in a position when I'm in no position to say no. And it's like you're in the middle of a desert and somebody offers to give you a ride. And in your head, if I get into this car, this person's going to want to have sex with me. That's why he's offering me a ride. But what are you going to do? Stay in the desert? It's like you don't have a choice. You see what I'm saying? This is where I was with these people coming to offer their assistance. So when it came to the occult criminal investigation PDF, so by the way, this is finally reached. Confirm it did reach you, correct, Salman? This is the.
I'll check it right now.
This is the City of Glendale, California, Police Department Occult Criminal Investigation Manual. And so it is the U.S. Department of Justice files, National Institute of Justice. That document was reproduced exactly as received from the person or organization originating it. Now, this is incredibly important. This means that the U.S. Department of Justice took this from the Glendale Police Department and filed it as it was received. This is why they had to stamp it with that caveat. Meaning U.S. Department of Justice, archived in the National Institute of Justice. This document has been reproduced exactly as received from the person or organization originating it. And the reason they had to say that, we're excised. And,
yep, I got it.
Yes, there you go. And the parts of it that were excised, you can find out when you look through it. They don't consciously stick with me right now which parts were excised, but obviously they would be the most important parts. So he's finally got it. He will, per his discretion, publish a link to that or publish that somewhere, wherever he wants. And but here we are. Take a look at it. I'm just opening it randomly. I'm just opening this randomly. But here we are is what's coming up in front of my eyes. In London is the Horned God cult. Every member has a horned god at home. This horned god has its arms outstretched, like Jesus on the cross. The feet are fashioned like a snake. In another chapter of the Horned God cult, mention has been made of the Goat of Mendes. This goat's head is the symbol of Satan. Although only a brief overview of Satan worship rituals is presented, it should assist the investigator/patrol officer in identifying some of the symbols. Another example of the influence of Satanist groups can be seen in this example of a schoolboy joined in a this is, by the way, if I were to quote this verbatim in text, I would have to enter in parentheses, I'd have to enter the word sick, meaning so. In other words, spelled or writ just as it was in the original, because this is execrable English. And many field manuals are like this, poor English. Another example of the influence of Satanist groups can be seen in this example. A schoolboy, they forgot the colon. That's what they forgot, was the colon. Can be seen in this example. Colon should be there. A schoolboy joined a Satanist group at the age of 9. At the age of 13, he skinned a small dog and drank its blood. Later, he developed a penchant for eating skin peeled off from the fingers and feet of other people who would let him. The most difficult and most important task of the investigator/patrol officer is to identify persons who have a propensity for pagan and satanic practices. The following are signs upon which the investigator should take note. And some common signs follow some common signs of deviant pagan and satanic practices, a typical profile. You know, I could go on reading this, but you get the point. Now, that little sentence right there, and that brings us to just an example that they're citing. But this was intended for patrol officers and investigators at all levels of law enforcement. So what happened to this kind of manual? Where are these manuals today? You won't find them in police manuals. And you'll notice here, Salman Sheikh will confirm this for you. One of the things you'll notice, Salman, is that this is basically a photocopy. So you'll notice that since this is a photocopy that has been digitized, you will see the punch holes. In other words, there are holes on the side of the original paper from which this was screened, so you could insert it in a ring binder that would open and shut. Yes. So the reason that this is important is because all police field manuals, from the FBI to the Drug Enforcement Agency to your local constabulary, these all have ring binders so that whenever there's new laws, new types of crime to be emphasized in terms of law enforcement, etc., they can literally take them in and out of the ring binder as these things evolve. So this sort of thing was removed from every ring binder of every law enforcement agency in the United States, whereas before, all U.S. forces had this in their ring binder. And I'll go into that, but can't resist this. This comes on page 2. How did the current widespread interest in Satanism evolve? This is from the manual here I'm reading from, page 2. Why are so many teenagers interested in the occult and Satanism? What importance do the many symbols have in relation to witchcraft and Satanism? Currently, a number of mass murders have been brought to the attention of law enforcement. The Night Stalker, Richard Ramirez, and the mass murder victims found near San Francisco area where Charles Ng was arrested. Newspaper accounts relate both incidents to have been flavored with satanic rituals or symbolisms. So just to put this into some perspective for you, when I worked at the Presidio Military Base Library on post as a Department of Defense research librarian, one of the people who would frequent the library was U.S. Army Green Berets Special Forces Master Sergeant Michael Ramirez. And Michael Ramirez had been sentenced to methadone treatment at the Letterman Army Medical Center. And of course, he was a Los Angeles resident, but he spent a lot of time in San Francisco. And I can guarantee you he was serial killing, basically going around and serial killing people in San Francisco. And of course, he was never caught for it. He might ultimately have been caught, but he died before he was caught. and he ultimately died of a heroin overdose. But when I asked him why he was sentenced to his methadone treatment, because I knew there were many people who escaped such punishment, and to be sentenced to methadone treatment is like nothing. All of these veterans get sentenced to this light ass shit all the time because, you know, it's like, oh, you know, you're a veteran and you've served your country. And so they give them a light ass sentence, like they sentence them to methadone treatment and shit. And so when it comes to this kind of sentence that he got, I was asking him why he got sentenced at all. And he said, oh, that's because, you know, he killed his wife in front of his nephew. And so his nephew acted as a, you know, a witness against him. And simply because he couldn't deny what had happened. And that's how he wound up being sentenced to methadone treatment. Now, notice the guy never went to jail. And when he got sentenced to methadone treatment, he was always trying to get into the children's room of the library. And as I've said before, the Presidio military base library had a children's room. And so he had a shoebox full of memories, all of these photographs of women he had killed in Vietnam, while a member of the U.S. Army Special Forces Green Berets, which, by the way, Michael Aquino was an officer in the U.S. Army Special Forces Green Berets. So get the idea of any kind of John Wayne nonsense out of your head. So when he had this, all of these photographs of these women that he abused, that he killed while having sex with, he was trying to show them to the children. And whenever I was on duty, I would prevent him from going into the children's room. One of the ways I would do that was by engaging him in conversation. If he wanted to show the photographs off, I would look through them. And eventually he would get his yah-yahs out, so to speak, or he'd blow his wad, ejaculate in his pants, whatever, and then go home. So at one point, when I asked him in the middle of these kinds of conversations to distract him from the children's room, exactly who his nephew was, that got him arrested, that when questioned by the police, reported the fact that he had killed his wife in front of him. He said, oh, it was my nephew. He loved these photographs. He would take this shoebox full of photographs to the graveyard and sit, you know, lean against the headstones at night and jack off. He'd masturbate to these photographs under the full moon. And then I said, wow, who was your nephew? Oh, he said, that's Richard Ramirez. So his nephew was Richard Ramirez, the Night Stalker, the serial killer in San Francisco. Now, in terms of the situation that we're dealing with, for those of you who don't really grasp it just yet, think about what happened in 2018 when Joseph DeAngelo was finally arrested. And Joseph DeAngelo was the Golden State Killer. He was a serial rapist, a murderer. He evaded capture for decades. Now, this guy was, like most police officers, a military veteran. One of the things I keep advocating against is hiring veterans in these positions, especially as law enforcement officers, because police work is not combat in the military sense. Combat in the military sense is completely different. You're trained for destruction, and police work is supposed to be social work. You are not out there specifically to kill people. That's not your fucking job. So that's supposed to be in self-defense only. It's supposed to be to protect another human being, and it's to give you people an example of why police should not be of a military background at all. When we had the Rodney King riots here in my golden state of California in Los Angeles, and the Rodney King riots were just basically a response to police brutality. Then you had the National Guard called in, and many people died. And much of this was completely covered up by the media. And this would happen because, say, for instance, when a police officer shouts, "Cover me," he means you keep your gun at the ready and you fire it if he comes under fire or he comes under assault. In the military, when you say, cover me, this means open fire. This means literally your fire will cover the person who will then do something while you're distracting them or engaging them in combat. So when the National Guard, which is a branch of the military, was brought into the Rodney King riots, there were several times when many people died because the policemen would say, okay, cover me. And these goons would open fire and kill a bunch of people because you do what you're trained to do. It's that simple. And so here you had this guy with a military background where he was conditioned to become a serial rapist and murderer. And you might say, oh, Douglas, that's so unfair. That's your anti-military bias. No, he was conditioned because when he was on a military base as a young boy, we're talking about when he was like 9 years old, 2 officers in full uniform gang raped his 7-year-old sister in front of his eyes and made certain, hey, join us. Come on, see how much fun it is? And that was what conditioned him to join the military and become a rapist and a killer. And then this man became a police officer, during which time he would go out and rape and kill at will with full impunity. He served an entire career as a police officer and retired with full military and police honors after killing hundreds of people. Hundreds of people! And when they finally brought him to justice, he's so old he doesn't know what's going on. He's 74 years old when he was arrested, suffering from Alzheimer's, dementia, and at that point needed to be put into full care anyway. So all they're doing is putting him in a rest home and giving him full treatment at your taxpayer expense. You're paying for him to be fed every day and for people to wipe his ass. This is the kind of so-called justice we're talking about. So these people are products of the military. They go out, they kill, they rape at will. The kind, either they become millionaires and you're told that they're literally God on earth, or they, like this old man here, they're given hospice care or full medical care at your expense when they get too old to be independent anymore. This is not justice. None of this is justice. It's accommodating these people. But all these laws against satanic crime are off the books, and I've gone into this before, but I'll go over it briefly again. Basically, what happened was there was this woman who helped me shut down the Presidio military base, got my high school teacher busted, and that was because even though he was one of the managers at the child daycare center at the Presidio military base who was raping and molesting and abusing all these kids, nobody in the military base would bust him. Nobody would arrest him. But we were able to get the San Francisco Police Department to arrest him because he was maintaining his child pornography on site a school in San Francisco Unified School District property. And since he was maintaining child porn on SFUSD property, the San Francisco police busted him where the federal government, via the U.S. military's Criminal Investigation Division, would not. So that was how Gary Willard Hambright got arrested. The person who arrested him was a very tall Nordic Aryan woman by the name of Sandy Gallant. And she was the San Francisco police officer, ultimately, I believe, an inspector. And Sandy Gallant, she attracted national attention when she brought her knowledge of satanic crime to bear on a murder investigation, which was in 1981, when she was notified about a homicide in San Francisco's Golden Gate Park. Now, the victim could not be identified because the head was missing. And there were several other unusual pieces of evidence, including a chicken's head left in place of the human head. So she said, this is part of a voodoo ritual, part of Vajo Udun's of the dark side of Santeria. And she predicted what would happen in the following 42 days. She said that someone would try to reunite the head with the body to create a zombie. as part of their Vajahuduns, their black voodoo ritual. And so the body was put under guard in a morgue. And a security guard who was guarding that body wound up paying with his life defending it. Somebody broke in and tried to reunite the head with the body. The security guard fought them to the end. He was killed, but the head was not reunited with the body. And that proved Sandy Gallen's point, that this was an occult crime. And at that point, she became known as the international expert because she got a call in the middle of the night on the 42nd day saying a security guard has died at the San Francisco morgue defending that body so that it couldn't be turned into a zombie. And she was consulted. She could have retired and made her entire career as a consultant in occult crime at that point. Everybody wanted her. Everybody was asking for her advice. She is the reason we had these occult crime manuals published at all. She was the original authoress of these occult crime manuals. And so when that happened, Michael Aquino said, if I kill this cunt, everybody's going to know that she was killed because of her expertise in occult crime. So what he did was he sent his man. He could not do it himself, even though he appeared. He loved publicity. He loved appearing in public. And yet he couldn't take on this job because the U.S. Army refused to allow him to use his authority as a military commander to deal with legal issues. In other words, what they said was, you can go on Oprah Winfrey and Geraldo Rivera and all the talk shows you want, but it's got to be out of uniform. And for that reason, he would always appear on talk shows in his satanic regalia as a high priest of the Temple of Set. That is why when you see him on interviews, he is always in the black robes and he's always looking like a wizard instead of an officer. So in order to use the Army's authority, he had his top man, James Channon, go out there and attack Sandy Gallen. And the way Lieutenant Colonel James Channon of the 1st Earth Battalion attacked her, and bear in mind, this was the man who was glorified in the film The Men Who Stared at Goats. The sex symbol George Clooney portrayed James Channon. So James Channon is no George Clooney. James Channon is an alcoholic who, when he talks to you, the first thing you notice are these bags under his eyes that look the color of beef liver. He's completely burned out. And the second thing you'll smell is his breath. And aside from all of the alcohol, you'll smell his dying liver decaying on his breath. This is no George Clooney. This is the guy they made the hero of The Men Who Stared at Goats. And this is due to Ron Johnson, the Jewish journalist who was determined to make the 1st Earth Battalion heroes. And the 1st Earth Battalion were the satanic warrior monks, the satanic Jedi of the Temple of Set. And so Michael Aquino's top Jedi, and don't give me any shit about the Sith and all this other crap about Sith versus Jedi and all the rest of that. Michael Aquino himself used the term Jedi for his satanic warrior monks. So that's straight from the horse's mouth right there. So when it came to Michael Aquino, he was using James Channon, who could go out in full uniform, and James Channon would go to all of these different police departments, whether they were agencies like the FBI or constabularies like the Los Angeles Police Department. Everywhere he went in full uniform and with the authority of the U.S. Army behind him. He would say, now, you can't persecute anyone because of their religion. We have freedom of religion in the United States. And if you were to persecute people for their religion, there are millions of people who are Roman Catholics. So if a Roman Catholic thug fell on desperate times and said he wanted to like rob a bank all of a sudden and actually did rob a bank, and when he robbed that bank, he happened to drop a vital piece of evidence, his Roman Catholic Saints medallion. So if you were to find that Saints medallion on site the bank that he just robbed, does that implicate the Roman Catholic Church? Does that mean the Pope in Rome is ultimately responsible for that man's crime? And of course, all the cops said, no, no, no. I mean, most cops were Irish Catholic. And they said, oh, no, of course not. Of course not. And so then he said, so just because you find a headless body in the middle of a pentagram drawn in human blood, that doesn't implicate the Satanic Church. That's just another crime. So all religious paraphernalia must be divested from the investigation. So all the police agencies said, thanks, that's less work for us. And they pulled out all of the occult crime manuals from out of their field manuals. And that's how James Channon eliminated the concept of occult crime from law enforcement. Now, understand, one of the original experts consulted in occult crime was Magus Anton Szandor LaVey, because he originally avoided the Korean War era draft by going to City College, studying criminology, studying photography, and then becoming a forensics photographer for the San Francisco Police Department. So he was an expert on the occult and crime, if ever there was one. And so one of the people who cooperated with Sandy Gallant to produce the manual on occult crime was Magus Anton Szandor LaVey. So understand that he did so because he was saying that he wanted to make certain people understood that he was not himself encouraging crime. And this was something that is to be taken into account. Understand, of course, that this is why this was taken seriously. If it weren't for, it wasn't just Sandy Gallant, if it weren't for Anton LaVey stepping forth and verifying what she was talking about, saying, yeah, there are people out there who are Satanists who are killing people, nobody would have believed her. This is what made it. He was a former employee of the San Francisco Police Department for years. She was, of course, a San Francisco police inspector. And if the Satan has a home, it's San Francisco, because the first Church of Satan was founded here. Michael Aquino founded the Temple of Set here. This is where Charles Manson, of course, had his headquarters, so to speak, for his tribe, the family. All of it now should be in context so that people understand that the law considered this a very real phenomenon, but the U.S. Army convinced the law not to enforce satanic crime law enforcement, not to enforce any law against satanic criminals. At that point, your satanic criminals were given a 007 license to kill. They could kill anybody they wanted, and all ritual evidence is dismissed. As a matter of fact, the police are responsible for cleaning up the ritual evidence. The police themselves will erase all of the bloody pentagrams. The police themselves will wash away all evidence of satanic crime. That makes them complicit in the crime itself. It makes them part of the satanic conspiracy. This is why the individual who wrote the book, The Ultimate Evil, I believe was the title of it. Maury Terry was, I believe, the author. Ultimately committed suicide because he said, Maury Terry, he wrote the book The Ultimate Evil about the satanic conspiracy, and he ultimately killed himself, drank himself to death, and I think even went a little further than just drinking himself to death when he killed himself. He was just said that because the police are part of the conspiracy. He says there's no hope. It's, in other words, America is a satanic culture at this point. We are completely under control of the satanic military junta. And for that reason, Maury Terry couldn't live anymore. He couldn't live in this world. But you have to, or you're going to have to learn how to. and with everything I've contextualized for you, I think that at this point, we'll go a little bit further with it for about another hour, and then I'll take off. But we've been here 3 to 4, 4 to 5. I think that we've got a pretty good context for what we've been talking about, and we can go a little further with some of the position that we're in as a society with this. And but first, I'd like to, quaff some tea.
It's interesting. Before you head off into the third hour, and this information is, I'm very grateful to you for the time and the love and education you have given us. It's interesting what you point out about James Channing, because in my area, in the local Philadelphia area, in the suburban area, they have this group. It's a satanic group, and they were able to get the local school districts here to basically remove from their handbooks that the students that were coming into the schools to not have like satanic imagery or what they described as cultish imagery. So these satanic groups here in the suburban area put so much pressure on the local school districts to remove it from their handbooks about the student dress code. So now students coming in who are part of this group having satanic imagery on their clothes or however they want to represent themselves, they're claiming freedom of religion. So that exact scenario with James Channing is happening here in the Philadelphia area. So, and it's interesting because most people don't realize how full of a cultist Philadelphia and San Francisco really is, like you pointed out. So it's mind-boggling that to this day, that technique used by Channing is being used by the local organizations here to have the superintendents from the school districts remove it from their handbooks, where Satanism or anything satanic apparel is considered I guess, against freedom of religion. So please continue.
What you mean to say, to put that in more articulately, or to articulate it more coherently so that people don't misunderstand you or miscommunicate, what you're saying is that the manuals of the schools had strict rules forbidding the satanic regalia or symbolism as a dress code, and that was forced into removal by the satanic advocacy groups and the satanic lobby, so that now it's considered an expression of freedom of religion. So what they removed were the regulations forbidding the presentation or display of satanic symbolism and satanic expression. That's what you're saying. It's just so the listeners understand. I know that's what you meant, but the way you presented it, it could be easily miscommunicated. It sounded almost as if you were saying that they were basically still forbidding it, the way it was expressed. So just I'm saying that so that people understand that, though I know most people understood you. It's always good. When you talk about this sort of thing, you have to think in extreme detail as if you're in a court of law. You have to think that you're on trial, because ultimately you are. Understand that everybody will attack everything you say when you bring these points up. This is the kind of world that we're in, and you know that.
Yes, definitely.
Yeah, and there we are. So what I was given was a link by Salman Sheikh. Hell of a victory. Satanists convinced Pennsylvania school to get past the school dress code, to change the school district, the entire school district, meaning this is public school. To change the dress code, and so there we have that. And when it comes to some of this, a good example that confuses people so that people understand the level of duplicity that we're dealing with, the true sinister, the insidious nature of the enemy. Understand what I've expressed about the necessity of Satan, the necessity of the fallen angel, the necessity of Lucifer, that there is a balance, and your real enemy is not the Satanists, because the Satanists themselves are really part of the cosmology. And when it comes to people who claim they're Satanists, oftentimes they're not. A great example is whenever you see these people who are trying to get the statue of Baphomet in public display. And, you know, Philadelphia is a hotbed for this. Boston, Philadelphia, all those northeastern, patriot cities that were around during the Revolutionary War period, they're loaded with this shit. And what these people do is they will go around saying that for freedom of religion's sake, you should have children's books on Satanism. And you should have the satanic statue at City Hall or in the court of law, because you have statues, you have the 10 Commandments, because you have the 10 Commandments. We want all of these people who are claiming that they're advocating on behalf of the Satan, they're not Satanists. These people are part of some nihilistic free speech movement. And this is a fact. These are atheists who are arguing for separation of church and state. And if you were really to speak to them, they would say, well, we're using the satanic angle as half a practical joke. And they're using the satanic angle as basically an example of how ridiculous Christianity is. In other words, what they're saying is, if you allow prayer in school, then that's enforcing a religion on children. It's imposing a religion on children in a public environment that is sponsored by the state. And therefore, it is a imposition of church on state. And so because they're fanatical about the severance of church and state, what they say is that basically it's unconstitutional. And so to show the absurdity of what is in their eyes, the absurdity of Christianity, then they pose the satanic counter-argument. And the absurdity of the satanic counter-argument speaks for itself, because if you look at the children's books, they're all about, and in the name of Satan, you should be butt-fucking each other and sucking each other off and encouraging sex among children. And they're saying, well, this is our satanic expression. Now, this is their way of introducing obscenity and child pornography, but they're saying it's freedom of speech. So these are people who are, believe it or not, these are constitutional fundamentalists. So these constitutional fundamentalists are saying that freedom of speech is to be taken to its logical extreme, and that separation of church and state must be taken to its logical extreme. Now, I've pointed out to Salman Sheikh's listeners before, there are basically 3 different types of Muslims. You have actual practicing Muslims, which are really rare and almost don't exist. And then you have cultural Muslims, who are just Muslim by dint of being born in a nation which has a Muslim culture. And most of these people don't bow towards Mecca 5 times a day. Most of these people find reading the prayers to be tedious. They are basically, however, they'll get very violent if you insult Islam, because that's what they grew up with and what they identify with. But then if you followed them around, you'd hardly ever see them enter a mosque. It's these kinds of people who are just cultural Muslims. And then, as I said, there are also secular Muslims. And secular Muslims is like what H.P. Lovecraft was. He studied the philosophy, and it helped him find out what he never knew. And then he tried to share that with other people. But he knew he couldn't do this from a practicing Muslim's perspective. He knew if he did that, he would alienate all his American readers. So the only way he could present it was as a work of fiction and tell most of his friends he was basically atheist. That was how his friends accepted it. And they just said, oh, okay. And then that made sense to them. And that was how H.P. Lovecraft was accepted in the United States. But at the same time, H.P. Lovecraft was never arguing freedom of speech taken to the point of child pornography. He was never saying that, oh, you have to have a spot for Cthulhu too in the court of law with a statue of the octopus and shit. He was a man who was basically trying to enlighten the public and ultimately trying to destroy credulity, which would make the public the kind of victims they are today. Nowadays, the majority of Americans worship the cult of alien gods. They watch the History Channel and they think aliens created humanity. And so it's beyond Satanism. That's not Satanism. That is the cult of the anti-gods. We are now Edomic. At that point, we're in Edomite territory. But notice what I said about Satanism. Your real Satanist is not going to attract attention to themselves. The Satanist is not going to go out there and say, hey, I want free representation and equal time too, because they don't want that kind of attention. These guys who want all that attention, they're clowning you, they're trolling you, and they're really doing it on behalf of nihilism atheism, separation of church and state, and ultimate free speech. And what they really are ultimately is Edomic. They're Edomite. They're Edomic, and they are presenting the anti-godly position, which is no limitations. That there are no limitations. You could do anything you want. Now, when I talked about these different types of Muslims, can you imagine someone within the realm of Dawar al-Islam or any Islamic culture that was secular, like Egypt? In Egypt, for instance, they have a huge tourism industry, so they have to have air-conditioned hotels where they sell alcohol. It's just that there's no tourists that are going to come to Egypt unless there's places that sell alcohol. So there's a secular enough state where they know this is reality and we are dealing with other cultures. What if somebody said, okay, we can't acknowledge Allah anymore? And I mean, obviously it would be absurd. Nobody in Egypt is going to do that. This is simply their cultural background, even though they're dealing with other cultures. So when it comes to the United States, the fact remains that it was established in the constitutional Republican sense by a bunch of Christians. So, as a matter of fact, they weren't just Christians, they were Christian fanatics who were so fundamentalist they were kicked out of England. They were kicked out of England by Cromwell, who himself was such a Christian fanatic that he executed the king. I mean, that's how fanatical Cromwell was, and he couldn't even stand these people. These guys were so fucked up. These were like the Taliban or the ISIS of Christianity. He said, get the hell out of England. So they came to the United States. That's how fucked up these guys were. So to say that there's no Christian background in America is beyond preposterous. This is insane. So this is a denial of what culture one has. So this is when these people are saying that this is Edomite. These are people who are out for nihilism, that nothing has meaning, that nothing has meaning and you can do anything you want because there is nothing that has meaning. Therefore, there are no limits. So that is what to know about these people who are promoting quote unquote Satanism. They're not Satanists and they're ultimately Edomite. So that's another point to be made. So where are we in terms of where we're at right now with the extremes of skepticism and denial? The first thing that you get when you look up satanic ritual abuse is denial. That's basically what you get. You're looking at all these people saying satanic panic, this doesn't exist. Well, so this brings us to the sociology of the debate about satanic ritual abuse. And what I realize as someone who has served in so many positions of responsibility at every level of government. I have been in the Marine Corps. I served in Operation Desert Storm. The Marine Corps, of course, denies this. And yet I have the combat injuries from it to prove it. Not just any combat injury, not like a gunshot or a knife blade, because anybody could do that. I could do that to myself. My lungs are stapled to my rib cage, and that's visible by X-ray. And that's because my lungs collapsed 7 times in a row. Ultimately, not in a direct row, like you might think, where they're like happening constantly. I would never have survived that. Nobody could survive that. It was like they were collapsing pretty much every year until the doctor said they can't be reinflated anymore. And I was going to spend the rest of my life on a chest tube, which I said, no, thank you, I'll kill myself. And that's when they said, well, there's one other thing we can experiment with. And so they unhinged my lower jawbone and they went inside and they stapled my lungs to my rib cage. This is visible by X-ray. And the chest tube sites are also visible. My lungs kept collapsing because I was exposed to cyclosarin nerve gas, which of course had been developed by Saddam Hussein to deploy against the Kurds. It's what he used in genocidal operations. This is something nobody could do to themselves. Nobody can do that. You can't collapse your own lungs like that repeatedly. And so I have irrefutable evidence. I served in Gulf War. I was there in Desert Storm. So the Marine Corps can take their chicken shit little fabrication of my documents. I myself dealt with document destruction and document alteration. So you might call it karmic that the Marine Corps played that trick on me just to avoid any benefits. But the joke's ultimately on them because I exposed them in the book, The Roswell Deception and the Demystification of World War II, just what criminals the Marine Corps are, and all the crimes they committed against the United States, against other branches of service like the U.S. Army. So aside from being in the military, I served as a San Francisco police officer. I graduated from the San Francisco Police Academy and ultimately served in what's called a patrol special. Patrol special is a very specific San Francisco police department within a department, left over from the Barbary Coast days. There's no other police force in the world that has something like that. So when it comes to serving in law enforcement in the military, I also served at the municipal, state, and federal levels of government. So I know your government, your military, your police work, not to mention, I took care of my parents in the last 11 years of their lives till both of them died, during which time I attended a decade of courses in the extended adult education community as sponsored by the people at UCSF through the Osher Lifelong Learning Institute. So I've got the credit equivalent of a master's degree in library science from the University of San Jose and a credit equivalent of a master's degree in medical journalism from UCSF. So I'm far more educated than your average American, far more experienced than your average American. I'm far more educated and experienced than damn near anybody on earth. So I know what the fuck I'm talking about. When I majored in criminal psychology, a double major in criminology and psychology at City College of San Francisco, and got my Associate of Arts, Associate of Science degree there. When I got my AAS degree there, the people who instructed me were old men just about to retire. The people who taught me criminal photography in particular. These were the same men who, when they first started their teaching careers, were the men who taught Anton LaVey criminal photography. He learned his trade in forensic photography from the same men who decades later, just before their retirement, taught that to myself. So I had the same teachers as Anton Szandor LaVey, the founder of the First Church of Satan, in the same skills. So I could tell you that the sociology about the debate of satanic ritual abuse is similar to that of the abortion debate. And it's, in and of itself, a permutation of the psychology of the Edomites. It's Edomite psychology at play here. Many parties to this debate, on both sides, are not studying the problem in any scholarly, academic, scientific, or disinterested fashion. Rather, they are speaking from preconceived ideological positions. A sociologist who specializes in urban legends will say it's all urban legend. A fundamentalist Christian who performs exorcisms will say that Satan is stalking the land. A therapist who believes survivors as a matter of policy will believe it is all real, and so on. None of these positions is helpful in the planning of contending with this problem, let alone therapy for its victims. And all are excessively focused on the question of the external reality of satanic ritual abuse. On the believer side, one hears arguments that because the survivor has body memories, the ritual abuse must be real. Such statements are, in turn, scornfully dismissed by skeptical psychiatrists as the typical naivete of undertrained professionals. It is as if each side is setting up the other in a way that can only maintain the system's status quo. You're in a box you can't escape. Both skeptics and believers take such extreme and overgeneralized positions that they appear ridiculous to each the other, thereby justifying complete and total entrenchment of each position. This is the polarization we've seen with the pandemic, with our politics, with everything that divides America in twain. The Edomites have succeeded in dividing us. Thus, the debate continues ad infinitum with no end in sight, no one changing position, and no empirical data being gathered. In this respect, the debate about satanic cults is like the debate about abortion. In both forums, no one changes position. The quality of argument is so low as to be non-existent. All you have is people shouting at each other. There's no argument. It's whoever shouts the loudest shouts the other down. It's each side trying to overpower the other by political force. This polarization about satanic ritual abuse is going to be played out in the courts over the next decade. You see it now with the release of the satanic perpetrators we've just seen, with expert witnesses from both extremes making dogmatic statements which go far beyond any available data or scientific knowledge. So in this secular war between believers and skeptics, careers, reputations, therapies, and retirements will all be ruined, with no advancement in any real understanding. The anti-gods prevail. The arguments that are advanced are always intellectually dishonest. Exempli gratiae. A skeptic will argue that the claims of therapists treating satanic ritual abuse cases are not supported by any adequate treatment outcome studies, and will then call for caution by believers. Now, this would seem reasonable, but the skeptic actually uses the absence of outcome data as an argument against the sociological reality of satanic ritual abuse, when the absence of outcome studies is, in fact, neutral with respect to questions of sociological reality, were anyone to apply any logic to the argument. The absence of outcome studies documenting a successful treatment for AIDS has never led anyone to draw the conclusion that AIDS doesn't exist. Think of the absurdity of what I've just said. No one's ever been cured of AIDS. Therefore, AIDS isn't real. You hear that now about COVID, believe it or not. COVID's just the start. Soon it'll be at that point where they say it about AIDS. And then we'll be like South Africa, where everybody gets it. The skeptic will then go on scornfully to dismiss the therapeutic practices of believers, stating that they are harmful and regressive, and will then dogmatically insist that the treatment should be done his or her way. The problem is that there are no data to support the claim that the believer's therapy is regressive, and no data to support the efficacy of the skeptic's approach. This being the case, it becomes self-evident that the skeptic is not really interested in weighing any of the arguments. In order to conduct a balanced redress of this very real phenomenon, or even balanced therapy for its victims, it's essential not to be pulled out too far into skeptical non-belief, to assist therapists in that regard, to counter the position of the extreme skeptics, because now they have the stage. Think about the psychiatrist's claims that mental health professionals treating ritual abuse survivors are unscientific and undertrained. I myself have heard psychiatrists and psychiatric residents state, with their amused superiority, their infinite condescension, in private and in public, that the explanation for satanic ritual abuse hysteria is the fact that undertrained non-medical therapists are doing all the therapy. The first time I heard this said was circa 1985. And it was around that time I was just beginning my training in psychology with criminal psychology at City College of San Francisco. even though the speaker was referring at that time to the treatment of non-ritual incest. You know, the kind of quote unquote normal incest. You know, when daddy just can't keep his hands off the daughter. The irony from academic psychiatry's point of view is that the most difficult psychotherapy cases are being treated by the least qualified and least supervised professionals. By that, in case you haven't gathered it by now, let me put this into some context. I'm talking about social workers. Who's the first person to encounter satanically ritually abused children? Social workers. Because if you don't get that by now, you don't live in reality. They're in fucking places where they report to their teachers if they're at home, right? If mommy and daddy are fucking you at home, you tell your teacher. If your teacher's fucking you at school, you tell your mom and daddy. Who are the people that are brought in after the police in each case? The social workers. So they're on the front lines. Now, these therapists have not been trained in scientific critical thinking and therefore are likely to mismanage their cases. That's the prevalent view. And this viewpoint was entrenched in academic psychiatry before either satanic ritual abuse or false memory syndrome even entered public awareness. So early in my training, I more or less agreed with this viewpoint, since it appeared to be a simple fact that social workers had less training and less background in the sciences than did psychiatrists. My misperception of these issues was fostered by the fact that during my training, I had no extra hospital contact with therapists treating sexual abuse patients, so had no exposure to corrective criticisms by them. And gradually, a different view of the situation was forced upon myself by my experience. I realized several things. First, that it's almost impossible to get the majority of academic psychiatrists to treat even a single incest survivor with specific psychotherapy. Most academic psychiatrists treat predominantly light neurotic cases in their private psychotherapy practices. That's what I discovered, and they have little or no experience in the long-term psychotherapy of chronically mentally ill patients with serious Axis 1 disorders. Additionally, it's almost impossible to get the majority of academic psychiatrists to be the primary treating physician on a long-term basis for someone with, say, for instance, schizophrenia. I was myself appalled, completely surprised to learn in my training that only a tiny number of patients with severe mental illnesses have academic psychiatrists as their primary treating physicians on any ongoing basis. So, from 1981 through to 1985, I myself received no instruction whatsoever on childhood sexual abuse, its epidemiology, long-term consequences, treatment, or causes. I literally had no more expertise on childhood sexual abuse at the end of my training than a radiologist, except for reading that I had done on my own outside my training. Now, during this period, I did have extensive discussion with the need to modify the residency training programs in various ways. But no mention was ever made of childhood trauma in any of those discussions. Throughout my time at City College of San Francisco, I never heard, wherever they sent us for a kind of internship, well, I worked for a time with the suicide hotline. You wouldn't believe how many people call in to say they grew up satanically ritually abused, and then no one will believe them, and now they're going to kill themselves. It's every other call. If you worked on a suicide hotline, you would think every American had grown up this way, satanically ritually abused. And yet, I never heard throughout that period of time a single psychiatrist or resident of any medical school express any concern about the lack of emphasis on childhood trauma within psychiatry. Nor did I never heard any serious childhood trauma mentioned in a single case presentation during those 4 years. For a time, when I was exploited as a spy by the Department of Defense, I was sent to Sonoma State University in Rohnert Park, the armpit of wine country, in California. And at Sonoma State University, I was assigned to infiltrate Project Censored, which was a special club for journalism majors, where they would report on the most underreported stories of the year to prove their mettle as journalists. It was sponsored by John McLaughlin, Ted Koppel, Walter Cronkite, the biggest names you can imagine. And in that journal club, I learned that many residents of these kinds of schools were unable to read psychiatric literature from a critical scientific viewpoint and could not even spot glaring major methodological problems in published papers. In other words, the underreported story I wanted to write about was satanic ritual abuse and its treatment. That's where I found out there was none. And this experience forced upon myself the realization that many psychiatrists are incapable of scientific analysis of a problem. After my experience in all these areas, when I was caring for my parents in the last 11 years of their lives, and in a sense, it was the end of my life with the end of theirs. Much of me died with them. But all that time, because of my experience in the past with the Presidio military base, in medical environments, I found myself speaking with, in the hospital environments. My parents were always constantly and chronically hospitalized. I personally confronted many MPD, multiple personality disorder cases, in the hospital environment. And I learned that late 20th century psychiatry is actively opposed to accepting the reality of severe childhood trauma and its pervasive long-term consequences. Throughout all of the DSM-4, that's the psychiatry manual. And this resistance takes many forms, including political backstabbing, passive-aggressive interference, overt anger, mockery, derision, most of all, refusal of any funding. Now, things have changed since the mid-1980s, but only very slowly. And MPD, multiple personality disorder, is still a topic for ridicule, jokes, and scorn in many psychiatric settings. The resistance is complex, active, largely unconscious, almost completely so, and it requires a great deal of energy. Conscious intellectual resistance is a small subcomponent of the overall process. It's basically reflexive. That's the problem that you see Penny Bradley always bitching about. Everywhere she goes, what she's saying is she's got multiple personality disorder. That's what she's telling you. I have alters. She says, I have alters. That's MPD. Everyone keeps telling her, you're delusional. You're delusional, which is a totally different illness. It's a totally different trauma. So here we are from the late 20th century all the way through now the early 21st. And academic psychiatry has been actively refusing to deal with victims of serious childhood trauma, providing inadequate training in the area, and literally attacking those mental health professionals who are doing their best to treat survivors. You're then called someone who's an abusive psychiatrist who's implanting memories. The psychiatrist is then said to be the culprit, implanting memories in their clientele. The mask of greater expertise, training, and critical thinking skills is false. Late 20th century psychiatry, as a profession, was completely undertrained to deal with the long-term consequences of serious childhood trauma. The average psychiatrist, by virtue of his or her academic training, is still no more qualified to diagnose and treat sexual abuse survivors than a judge is qualified to hear child custody cases by virtue of his or her legal training. In our society, a judge who has had no training of any kind in child development, family systems theory, or the social sciences, and has never practiced family law specifically, can still decide a child custody case. The training of most psychiatrists to deal with sexual abuse is equally deficient. So that's just the beginning of the problem that we are confronting in our society. And it brings us to whom the true villains are. Now, I've been talking about the psychiatric profession. I've been talking about how this is just not up to the task. It brings us now to the conspiracy. Honestly, when it comes to where we're at in terms of the enemy, that's what brings us to the False Memory Syndrome Foundation. Understand that there is a FMSF out there. And we've talked about Michael Aquino creating Wikipedia, one of the founding fathers. The Presidio military base was effectively closed, on its way to closure by 1991. It took half a decade till 1995 before it was fully closed down. By that last half decade, Michael Aquino was no longer actively involved with the Presidio military base to any great extent. But what happened was there were a couple of assholes. Well, there's so many of them, and you might think about the people we were originally talking about, this couple that was recently released from prison because of, they were accused of satanic ritual abuse. And of course, they had to be not just not guilty, but innocent, a term that is never used for any other than the Virgin Mother of God. Because all Christians believe no person is innocent. We suffer from original sin. To say that someone does not puts them above the level of human. That means they're a higher order of being. So when we heard about Francis and Dan Keller, there's an example of a couple who were running a daycare center who were brought to justice for a bit of time for their crimes. There was another couple, the couple that comes to my mind, named Peter and Pamela Freed. The names were spelled F-R-E-Y-D. Peter and Pamela Freed used to repeatedly torture and rape their daughter. When their daughter finally exposed them, well, they were a couple of high power people. They weren't just high power, they were educated academics. And so these high powered, educated academics, Peter John Freed is an American mathematician. He's a professor at the University of Pennsylvania. So when his daughter said, "My dad is shoving everything he can up my ass. He buys different shaped dildos of different sizes." All these details, they responded by establishing the False Memory Syndrome Foundation. And the original board members included doctors who were directly involved in MK Ultra mind control programs, such as the expert hypnotist Martin Orne, surname spelled O-R-N-E, and Dr. Louis Jolyon West. Louis Jolyon West, as well as many others. The one thing they all had as criteria They had all been accused of child sexual abuse. One board member, Richard Ofshe, O-F-S-H-E, that's how you spell the surname, was an expert on coercive persuasion techniques. He's the man who worked with Michael Aquino when it came to the biofac simulacra. These were what these days you would call androids, but in those days they simply called them advanced mechanisms. Human-like dolls that could speak, talk, even reason. To a very limited extent, a kind of learning capacity, a primitive artificial intelligence, along the learning arc of a severely developmentally disabled child. Tortured by your military so they would learn heartlessness and detach from all empathy with human life. Another was Margaret Singer, a government expert on cults and cult tactics, who was a cult leader herself. Elizabeth Loftus is an expert on memory. The mandate for the FMSF, the False Memory Syndrome Foundation, has always been to discredit the recovered memories of people who report having been traumatically abused as children. Almost always by claiming that the child's therapist has implanted false memories. You know, when I attended all those courses on medical journalism, one of the things I found out, of course, was why nobody gets any painkillers. This was important to me because my lungs had collapsed so many times. And there's nothing more painful in my personal memory than lung collapses. They're called spontaneous pneumothoraces in the plural. And a spontaneous pneumothorax, when your lung detaches from your rib cage and scrolls down like papyrus, and you're left unable to breathe as all the mucus fills up that vacuum. Nature abhors a vacuum, so in that vacuum, all this mucus fills it up and ultimately presses against your heart, and you feel that too. This is what people usually die of when they're shot or stabbed, by the way. It's not the bleeding out, it's the lung collapse, because then all that blood fills that vacuum and presses up against the heart. And ultimately what kills you is you're drowning in your own blood. And when I was on the chest tubes, the pain of not being a fat man or a muscular man, those big, thick plastic chest tubes rubbed right up against my rib bones with only a thin amount of skin keeping them attached to my body. And sometimes that skin would tear and the pipe would fall out. And I'm left with exposed ribs. When one of these stupid doctors, Dr. Doofdash something, she had a hyphenated name. I remember her as Dr. Doofus. In those days, they used to train these kids by having them prove they could work for days and days without sleep. And they were mistreating their patients in conditions of total sleep deprivation. She sent me home without stitching up the chest site wound where the chest tube had been. She put a Band-Aid over it, said I was cured, sent me home, and I got so infected that I became the only living floater recorded in medical history. For those of you who don't know, if you ever see whales that are dead in the ocean, they bloat up and they look like floating blimps. Or you see dead bodies float up, human bodies. The floaters, they're all bloated. They're all full with all of this gaseous, noxious fluid. That's what I was filled with. When I got to the hospital finally, it had gone up to my neck and choked off my ability to speak. When I could talk, I sounded like a Muppet, sounded like a joke. I called 911 to take me to the hospital, but they thought I was somebody playing a hoax. They said, stop talking like you're Elmo, motherfucker. Like the old Tickle Me Elmo dolls. I finally had to take a firearm and stick up an ambulance. You see, ambulances are parked at various places in San Francisco so they can have adequate response time. If they came straight out of the fire department, they'd be fighting traffic. So they park them strategically where they can answer calls of emergency. I knew where they sat down all day watching the girls walk by and eating burritos. So I walked down 2 blocks and held one up with a firearm and forced them to take me to the hospital at gunpoint. I was absolved of responsibility by the judge because of the situation was life and death, and I was justified. But you see, the point is that I never got any pain drugs. Through all of this experience, I never got painkillers. Because the doctor said, oh, well, you're listed as an addictive personality. We can't give you painkillers. So I was in so much pain that I could crack ball bearings with my butt cheeks. They were clenched so tight. That was the first time in my life I ever developed hemorrhoids. Later on, while I was attending all of these medical journalism courses, one doctor was saying quite seriously, he says, you know, when your average MD gets up in the morning and they pick up their copy of the JAMA, J-A-M-A, the Journal of the American Medical Association, you know, just as your average man in the old days would pick up a newspaper and the first thing they'd turn to would be the comics and the obituaries, find out who died in the neighborhood, who they outlived. The first thing a doctor does when they open the JAMA is they turn towards the back to see who lost their medical license. So they can see who in the profession got their medical license revoked and got barred from medical practice. And he says, it's always the same shit. The only thing that gets you busted to the point where you lose your license is passing out painkillers. Because everyone in America is addicted to drugs. So the only thing they're going to threaten you with and remove your medical license for is getting people addicted to drugs or catering to drug abusers. It's the same, too, with what we're talking about psychiatrically when it comes to these therapists who are treating ritual abuse survivors. In other words, just as a general practitioner, a pill roller, will get busted for rolling pills that get people addicted and therefore never passes out painkillers, a psychiatrist will lose their license, or any counselor, like a psychologist, if they treat ritual abuse survivors. Because then they'll say, just as the MDs are catering to drug addicts and worsening the universal drug addiction problem, these counselors then are said to be worsening.
Let me see. Yeah.
By the way,
they're really messed with us tonight.
They are. No surprise. I'll have to repeat myself a little bit, I assume. Let me go to the restroom. I'll be back in a few minutes. Okay, I'll let you know when I'm back. All right.
All right, Brother Douglas.
Yes. Be right back.
Got it. Oh, thank God. I was so worried about the recording. See, you know, these topics are so sensitive. You have to, you just have to know that the enemy will come and try to interfere with you. They interfere with my connection twice tonight, and it's interesting, like when you're dealing with this kind of topic, and especially when Brother Douglas touches on the medical industry, and it's like its own occult complex in many ways. And, you know, these things happen. That's exactly when they cut us off. So, you know, thank God for Skype's feature, where at least the call didn't get cut off, or the recording, or almost 3 hours worth of recording didn't get cut off. So let's stay on the positive side here, and we will finish this with Brother Douglas when he returns from his break. Okay. And in the meantime, I would highly recommend his books, The Roswell Deception and the Demystification of World War II, and Vampirology. Some of the greatest books that I have read in my life, especially The Roswell Deception. It'll show you so much history about World War II and this mystique surrounding the aspect of World War II and what you were taught in your history books. And this book will basically tell you the truth about the aspects of how it happened, when it happened, why it had to happen with Japan and the whole alien phenomena, and it is basically was the deception of Roswell. And Brother Douglas does a fantastic job with this book. And it's important that we get the important history of why things are in this country the way that they are. And it's, to touch on what Brother Douglas said also with the SRA, there's this aspect of them not being able to have stable or healthy relationships, like how a lot of what he describes, with how a lot of these industries are kind of in it, basically to manipulate the person that is abused, where they show the person that's doing all of the bad stuff as the good people, like, with the Keller situation, and those that are actually abused, they don't get any justice. And because you're dealing with an anti-godly realm. And a lot of these individuals who do get abused, they're never able to have healthy relations in their life. Like, there's somebody that I know here in the local area, and there was a woman that he loved, and supposedly she had something similar where she was abused in her childhood, and that traumatized her the rest of her life. And I think by the time she got to her teenage or adulthood in the high school, college era, it was an aspect of hypersexuality, going from one relation to another, not being able to have healthy relations. So, and it just shows you that this traumatizes and damages the person for life, where they, even if they want to settle down and marry, they're unable to. And it goes to show you how important this discussion is, where the enemy has interfered with I have the best internet connection in this area, and you see how they're interfering with me like 2 to 3 times because of the information Brother Douglas is sharing.
Yes, thank you. Thank you. That's very, very important, and I am definitely appreciative. So let me try and put this in some further perspective here. Of course, one of the things that they cut off, and I'll have to kind of repeat myself so that people understand what my point was. One of the things that they were hoping to do, obviously, was to derail me from train of thought. Because once you're at the point where you're making a point like that after so detailed an articulation, then of course, believe me, they're listening to every word while we're speaking, and they cut us off at a very specific time. And by the time they cut us off, what would you say I was talking about at the exact time that we were cut off?
You were talking about like how in the medical industry, they like how the average person looks through the obituaries to see who lived and who's died, but the medical industry, what they look for is who lost their license. And the greatest thing that they have to worry about is not over prescribing the painkillers, because that's when they lose their license, and how the MDs have to kind of be careful in a society that's basically a satanic culture that's all drugged up, abused, and they don't know what they're doing.
And the reason, thank you very much. The reason that the doctors are doing that, by the way, just so our man Salman Sheikh, I'm kind of, how would I say it, recovering the lost tracks for all of us. When it comes to these MDs doing that in the morning, it's kind of like this morbid interest, half morbid entertainment. And this is not based on any sense of responsibility. The way Salman presented it, it almost kind of rationalizes or justifies they're not prescribing painkillers. The reality is what's going on here is a very irrational and medically unjustifiable denial of painkillers when the people who are usually in need of them are hospitalized. That's the point here. We're not talking about people who are outpatients. People who are outpatients, you might have addicts who are at the point where they are abusing themselves or others to get meds that might be prescription level meds. And that is something that I had a hard time believing myself, but later on, Judith Ager in particular educated me about this because she had been someone who had participated in Alcoholics Anonymous, where they deal with many addicts. And so people do take hammers and smash their hands in order to get painkiller prescriptions. People do jump off ladders in order to get painkiller prescriptions. Those kind of people, however, are outpatients. At the point that somebody is an inpatient like I was, with a chest tube, multiple chest tubes, one time chest tubes on either side, with both lung collapses, you know, at that point, you're not dealing with a drug addict. You're dealing with somebody who's in excruciating agony and expressing that they are in pain, but the doctors are not prescribing painkillers. And at the same time, you have people who are dying of cancer who are senior citizens. Say you've got senior citizens who are in hospice and doctors are not prescribing painkillers. And all of this is the same rationalization. Oh, we cannot encourage potential addiction. Like, say the person is 87 years old and they're dying of cancer and they're in agony, and all the chemo has failed and they've stopped the chemo anyway because the person is 87 years of age. What are you going to do? And no painkillers are prescribed. At that point, you would have to say this is gratuitous sadism. But the rationale is, oh, we cannot create a drug addict. Okay, this is beyond all reason. This is now a lunatic policy that is simply a excuse for gratuitous sadism. It's no longer medically viable. It's not, it can't be rationalized in any sense. So the denial of painkillers wound up with the longest collateral damage and effects on myself was a case of hemorrhoids that I have to deal with the rest of my life, which has gone in remission, but nevertheless forced me to go through a goddamn colonoscopy, which I never would have had to have had if I didn't have hemorrhoids. So this is something that, because I have hemorrhoids, there's always going to be a small trace of blood in my fecal matter, which means that because of that, when I took the stupid test, which they say, take this test and you can avoid getting a colonoscopy. But since the colonoscopy, you know, was made a necessity because there was a little blood in my fecal matter, I had to suffer through something I didn't need. So this is part of the insanity of what goes on. If I had been allowed painkillers, I wouldn't have had a colonoscopy later, which, you know, there we go. It's just part of these things have repercussions. So when the doctor was expressing what he did and said that we go around looking at who got busted, what he's talking about is a kind of code of denial has been put in place. And this is completely non-medically related. It's an irrational social reflex that has created a perversion of medical science. Medical treatment, one of the things is do no harm. Obviously, allowing someone to suffer in pain is harm. So when medical science is no longer prescribing painkillers, they are committing harm. That is harming someone. So they are going against their own oath of ethics. So ethics has been perverted by a lunatic ideology that suppresses efficacious treatment. This is what we have when it comes to treating satanic ritual abuse survivors. So when it comes to the counselors or psychiatrists, psychologists or psychiatrists, counselors at any level, social workers, psychologists, psychiatrists, at any level of treatment, anyone who treats satanic ritual abuse survivors is persecuted out of their profession in the same way that doctors who feel any sense of merciful ethical responsibility towards their patients prescribes painkillers and loses their license. Does that make sense? Do you see what I'm saying?
Yeah. Yes.
In other words, society has geared it. Yeah. Oh, by the way, we're glitching. Hopefully we don't get cut off again because I noticed that when our man Salman was talking, he got glitched out there. So
yeah, I mean, it's interesting, Brother Douglas. This topic and the education you're providing it's so powerful, and it goes to show you how much of a threat your information is to the enemy, and how powerful the information you're presenting is. I mean, even like when you were talking to me, I get a lot of messages on it's a app called WhatsApp, which is like a messaging service like Messenger, and it's all under Facebook anyway. So I get a lot of messages like from these different like Chinese numbers, just like how that one time you had the Chinese characters when Penny Bradley was interviewing you, and that the same thing happened to them. So I get a lot of messages from like Chinese numbers, or it'll have images of Chinese women at the same time, like my internet is being glitched. So for those that are listening, Douglas Dietrich's truth, it's the reason why the cults of the kings of Edom and these different Edomites, that's why he is such a threat to them, because he is the Vulcan interventionist for humanity. And it's our war. And we have to realize how many times we got interfered with tonight, that he is telling you the truth. and you need to support him in any way that you can. So please, my brother, continue.
Thank you, bless you. And so when it comes to like what I've said, understand the parallel here. Just as medical science is rendered basically in violation of its own Hippocratic oath, so that it's no longer efficaciously providing relief to those in pain. So too, any counselor, no matter what their level of training and professional certification, whether social worker or psychologist or psychiatrist, is allowed to treat satanic ritual abuse survivors, because if they're found out to be doing so, they are automatically no longer allowed to practice. They are driven out of their profession in the same way that MDs who prescribe painkillers have their medical licenses revoked. So this allows people to suffer in physical agony, and it allows people to continue suffering in psychological torment. And ultimately, it all denies the impact on all of us and all our lives that the kings of Edom and their cultists have, the cultists of chaos. And with that, the enemy that I was pointing out, the false memory syndrome enemy, the enemy that basically tells you that all these memories are false, the False Memory Syndrome Foundation, the FMSF. I mentioned about the founders, and I mentioned the father being a mathematician. Well, the founderess, his wife, was Pamela Freed, F-R-E-Y-D, and she's the executrix directress of the False Memory Syndrome Foundation, and she has a PhD. So she is a doctoress, professores, and her daughter, who accused both parents of raping them repeatedly. I presume everyone remembers that part before we got cut off. Her daughter, I will give out her name. Her daughter's name is Jennifer Freyd. And Jennifer Freyd's also a PhD. And just so you know, their daughter Jennifer is a professoress of psychology at the University of Oregon. So her daughter's just not some girl who is fabricating stories. She is herself a professoress in psychology who is an academic professional instructor who knows of what she speaks, and stated in public she had been sexually abused throughout her childhood, and described such abuse in detail as ritualistic. So when her daughter did this, her parents responded with nuclear response. Gathered together all of the biggest pedophiles on earth. And the mandate of the FMSF has always been to discredit the recovered memories of people who report having been traumatically abused as children. Almost always by claiming that the child's therapist has implanted false memories. And that's the full cycle of the fix is in. In other words, those therapists who do treat victims get attacked by the FMSF, and their licenses are subsequently revoked. So it is illegal, in effect, to treat these victims. Not only that, but the False Memory Syndrome Foundation develops legal defenses for protecting pedophiles in court. And to do so, they have resorted to lies, intimidation, character assassination, legal tactics, and coercing victims to recant their claims. And thereafter, they will pay the victims and support them financially only if the victims sue their own therapists for implanting their memories into them. This is why no therapist will ever treat a satanic ritual abuse victim, because the False Memory Syndrome Foundation will pay that victim to then sue the therapist for a very large settlement. So the FMSF has routinely argued in court cases that satanic ritual abuse, acronymous as SRA, and multiple personality disorder, as acronymous as MPD, that they both, in both cases, both conditions simply don't exist, is their position. And the FMSF organization and its members have specifically targeted any therapists who claim they do. This defense strategy, which has proven to be completely successful, has allowed victims of trauma-based mind control and ritual abuse to be completely discredited while allowing their perpetrators to continue their activities unimpeded. So just as satanic cultists have a 007 license to kill, and it's not really the Satanists that are doing it, but the Edomites, so too do the Edomite abusers who produce these cultists. Now, at the time that the FMSF was established, a number of mind control and ritual abuse victims were starting to remember being involved in these events because they were coming of age. And this threatened to expose the perpetrators en masse. So it was important that a means to discredit them was put in place. The False Memory Syndrome Foundation was created by known and identified pedophiles, and its board was fortified with CIA mind control experts who cut their teeth on MKUltra victims. Many of them are known to be closely associated with Michael Aquino. And this organization of pedophiles and mind control experts have been instrumental in covering for Michael Aquino himself and all other pedophiles while destroying the lives and careers of their victims, the victims' families, and their therapists, even long after these pedophiles performed their vile acts against them. In 1995, Diana Napolis, surname Napolis, was a CPS, Child Protection Services Investigatores, in San Diego, California, who was alarmed by the increasing number of children who were reporting satanic ritual abuse, starting as far back as the mid-1980s. Diana, her name spelled with a single N, unlike my mother, Diana Dietrich, whose name was spelled with two N's, Diana Napolis went undercover online in 1995 and approached Michael Aquino and several others who were associated with him, while also posting information and evidence relating to those crimes and those people's involvement in them. In response, Michael Aquino and his associates, several of them from the False Memory Syndrome Foundation, cyber-stalked Diana Napolis for 5 years and finally tracked her down in the first year of the third Christian millennium, Anno Domini 2000, of the Common Era, thereby discovering her real identity. At that point, Napolis's efforts to expose those people were defeated, with Aquino and his associates using their power and influence to pose themselves as the victims and accusing her of cyberstalking, as well as engaging in assassinating her character both online and through the media. I can tell you that Napolis was also targeted with V2K, directed energy weapons, and set up to appear mentally unstable, with claims that she was stalking various celebrities. This resulted in her spending a year in jail and several more months in a mental facility, and eventually being forced to quit her job. But the character assassination continued against her, with someone claiming to be Napolis, posting insane ravings on the internet in order to make her appear crazy. I would be in her company when I would see these things appear on screen, and she wasn't entering them. A reporter at the San Diego Union Tribune was actually working for Aquino and his cronies by painting Napolis in a bad light in news reports, accusing her of cyberstalking, making threats, and acting crazy. Aquino himself was publicly complaining that she was causing serious problems for him and his fellow pedophiles. Nonetheless, the article at the first publication itself clearly revealed one-sided reporting. It was published in the San Diego Union Tribune, and it completely reversed satanic inversion, if you will. The fact that if anyone was being cyberstalked, it was Napolis. So my point about all this going after Napolis so publicly is that it serves several agendas. First, it's a public warning to anyone else who might attempt to expose the increasing satanic ritual abuse that was going on even then, and the people behind it. Second, it acted to deflate the satanic ritual abuse scare that was mounting. The awareness would be the better word for it. Make it look like a scare, like a panic, instead of an increasing consciousness and awareness. Third, it assured, well, to continue with the second, while it was deflating the satanic ritual abuse reality that even then was becoming publicly self-evident, it thereby made it appear to be nothing more than the ravings of delusional people. Tertiarily, or third, it assured that stealing other people's children using protection services could continue. And fourth and finally, with the help of the False Memory Syndrome Foundation, it made out children's claims of molestation and satanic ritual abuse to be nothing more than false memories. So all of this is something that barely touches the problem. We went a little after 6 p.m. because, of course, they cut us off. We'll wind it up in the next 15 minutes, and I'll leave at about 6:30 p.m. Pacific Daylight Time, which will be about 9:30 p.m. Eastern Daylight Time. So our man, Mr. Salman Sheikh, will help us go to the bottom of the hour. But obviously, there's much more we could cover. Certainly, one of the things that I want to emphasize is that when most of these people approach me, whether it was Lena Shea or, say, for instance, Salman Sheikh was aware of me at that point, and he remembered, of course, I can't even remember the name of that woman who interviewed me at the time that Peter Moon set me up with. He said that, oh, you should do this interview with that woman who had her own channel, and it turned into this long-running struggle where she exposed herself finally and got her channel basically kind of shut down on YouTube, where they wouldn't allow her to publish any more videos on it, and she had to set up a new channel. I can't even remember her name, but in terms of that interview, when she basically conducted what's called a soft ambush, and she interviewed me about satanic ritual abuse, and yet presented none of the images or graphs or the PDF file. What I gave you, I gave to her. None of this was presented on her program. She interviewed me for what was supposed to be 6 hours, put up only half of the interview. It was, and if maybe only a third, and thereafter used it as a magnet for attacks. This is the kind of individual, if you happen to remember her name, do share it with us. I don't remember what it was, but you might remember Lena Sheikh.
I'm trying to remember her name, Brother Douglas. It's in the back of my mind. I'm just like you. I try to bleach these people's names out of my mind because they're all cultists and Edomites. But I do remember that it was a soft ambush where they were trying to sabotage your information and not presenting the information correctly, which is a sign that you're dealing with a cultist, is when they're not presenting the full information that you're giving, and plus the resources in the description of the YouTube videos of all the descriptions and links that you share. So that's a sign you're dealing with somebody who's there to ambush you and a cultist. But ultimately, the thing is that the people that I've seen dig holes for Brother Douglas, they ultimately ended up falling into their own holes, whether it was the Bukaki Beret, or Aquino, or this individual who got her channel shut down, or the rest of the Edomites that came into his life, both female and male, in the guise of a friend. No one gets away with anything, because in the Sufi perspective, one of the 99 names of Allah is Al-Basir, and Al-Basir's eye is always observing you. No one gets away with anything, and that's what I assure Brother Douglas, that he's on the side of good, justice, humanity, and we are lucky in this pivotal time of that humanity's in this chaos that we're in, that we have someone like him assisting us and helping us in this, basically guiding mankind through the age of chaos, in this pivotal moment where we see where relations are strained, the inflation is high, people are kind of in an anxiety, they don't know what's coming in the future. So we need somebody like this to give us hope, to guide us into whatever that is coming in the next phase of humanity. But ultimately, the lesson is that people have to listen to him. And you see what happens with the aspect of, like, just this show where we're getting we're getting interfered in this show. I have these images of different Chinese women messaging me from these different numbers on WhatsApp. It just goes to show you what kind of threat that we're dealing with these cultists of the kings of Edom, which, you know, Brother Douglas has laid out this the aspect of satanic ritual abuse in an articulate manner, where you would educate yourself and see how do I see this, how do I identify it, and how do I battle against it in my own way. So that's something, Brother Douglas, we are honored to have tonight for part 4. And please, my brother, continue.
Well, the whatever the woman's name was, the one thing you might also remember, and our man Mr. Salman Sheikh can attest to this, you might remember how adamant and how emphatic Lena Shay's response was. She denounced this woman very fervently, and was very much very enthusiastic, to the point where one would question her motivation in striking back at this woman. And one realizes, of course, it's because she's guilty herself, and it's her own guilt that is reflected in her emphatic enthusiasm towards striking back at that woman. And the thing that both of them approached me with was the same thing Christine Joanna Hart, whose earliest memories were of sexual abuse by Michael Aquino. They all approached me with the same thing. They all had vague memories of ritual abuse, and that they were all victims. And so the thing that people also have to understand, the tragedy here, is because there's no counseling allowed, there's no treatment allowed. These people are never cured, and therefore, not only are they always victims, but they are completely subsumed by the enemy, and they are of the enemy. So that is the thing we must keep in mind. Does that mean someone like Penny Bradley or Rocco Fowler are the enemy? Well, it depends on how functional they are. You can tell who is the enemy by their level of functionality. In other words, is society accepting them? And with the ladies we were speaking of, society generally accepted them. They were not on the verge of homelessness, far from it. They were not suffering. They seemed to have a tremendous sense of self-confidence. They were enjoying life. They expressed enjoyment in life. They were not talking about suicide. They were not complaining about people calling them delusional pieces of shit. They were basically socially accepted, supported, and therefore they were the enemy. Because when they're coming up and saying, I have memories of this ritual abuse, and they're not totally homeless and totally persecuted with everybody calling them a delusional idiot, then they are obviously sponsored. So there we have that. That's a point to be taken into account. So the other point that one has to take from that is, I guess that's really the most important one. But in terms of the False Memory Syndrome Foundation. Perhaps I'll go more into that in the future. Certainly one of the things that I want people to understand is it is exemplary of the problem that we're dealing with. And the problem is, of course, your enemy is the authoritarian figures in society all too often. So the thing to realize is if you want to really fight this, if you try and do this on your own, you're going to go nowhere, and the only place you're going to go is down. The only way you can really fight it is to support myself. And it's, in other words, support my struggle, because my struggle is your struggle. I'm the only one who knows what to do. Now, there's a difference between this and, say, someone who's a victim like David Schroeder. Now, David Schroeder is a victim of Michael Aquino. And people, probably Salman doesn't consciously remember him, but have you ever heard the name?
It sounds familiar. I believe you mentioned him in one of your in your past transmissions.
Yes. And when it comes to David Schroeder, you're talking about somebody who was victimized by Michael Aquino to the point where he was personally witness, in his own words, to Michael Aquino putting infant babies on spits and roasting them over an open flame and eating them like barbecue. And, you know, this might go a long way towards explaining his, Michael Aquino's intestinal cancer manifesting at some later point. I mean, that kind of diet might lead to that sort of thing. But David Schroeder himself was obviously left irreparably damaged. When I came into Michael Aquino's life, David Schroeder was incredibly jealous and never forgave me. By the way, you'd think he'd be grateful that I took some attention off of him, but really wasn't the case. When someone is victimized like that, that becomes their bond. This is their attention that they get. They become. And so David Schroeder hates me and has publicly spoken against me. But David Schroeder wrote a book about his experiences called The Rabbit Hole, which in itself is a pretty suggestive title. When one man I knew who organized the conspiracy conferences named Brian William Hall was reading the book, which was given to him free by David Schroeder. David Schroeder was given free copies to a lot of people because he couldn't sell it, really. But not that he couldn't sell it, but I don't believe it was really selling, and you'd be kind of surprised by that. It's probably a quiet underground bestseller, because the way that Brian William Hall, who's gay, described it was, it's homosexual sado porn. He said it was like Clive Barker, who's like a gay sadomasochist, author of Books of Blood and other horror story themes. So he said that it was like every page he was turning, you know, one page it was dildo, the other page asshole. It was like, you know, it was just like gay porn to him. He offered to lend me the copy he had that he was reading, but I didn't want to turn those pages. I was afraid they'd be all sticky with his cum stains. So the point that I'm making about this is that when it comes to David Schroeder and what he wrote in The Rabbit Hole, we're at this point of guerrilla marketing on the part of a victim. And what I see people respond to when they saw him was they were saying, well, you know, the only thing that gets me is he's asking for financial support, and I just can't, you know, I just can't buy into what he's saying when, you know, he's asking you for money for him to extol his victimization. And I understand where people are coming from, but I am obviously not coming from that direction. What I'm telling you is that if you try to investigate this yourself, you try to campaign against this yourself, think about everything I've articulated to this point. The entire world is stacked against you. The only person who's ever been able to do it is me. I got the Presidio military base shut down. I got the gay porn ring of the Marine Corps shut down in San Diego. I'm the person who has succeeded in combating this. The one thing you've never heard of is really big shutdowns of child porn rings. The biggest was my shutting down the Presidio military base and forcing the United States military to rehabilitate themselves, at least in the public eye, to the point where they established the month of the military child, which is an actual month you can look up. to say how they're the epitome and the professional model of child daycare centers. By the way, I hope everyone would agree with me. The purpose of a military is to break things and kill people. Whatever else a military should be, it should never be a family environment. The fact that the US military has daycare centers should be enough to have you asking questions. It doesn't matter that they might be marketed with a sales pitch that the model professionally for all other daycare centers. Purpose is, why do they have them?
Mm-hmm.
That doesn't even, that shouldn't even be allowed. So the military is obviously trafficking in children, or they wouldn't have daycare centers. It's that simple. There's no other conclusion to be drawn, no matter what kind of bullshit line they feed you. So with that in mind, we'll come back to this topic and other topics. Our man Salman Sheikh has helped me carry it to the bottom of the hour. One way you can support me is to buy the Roswell Deception and the Demystification of World War II. The other is, of course, to support me directly through paypal.me/Douglas Dietrich. And I will accept contributions and, of course, my own home address. You can send checks or money orders to, never cash, at 1242 Green Street, 1242 Green, like the color green, San Francisco, California. And the zip code would be 94109. That's 94109. And you can you can add the last four numbers, what's called a zip 4. That's 94109-1925. So other than that, I will be taking off now for Halloween. My son will be picking me up soon. God bless you, Salman Sheikh. My love to you and all your own. And I hope you, well, I mean, this is kind of like it's Halloween. I'm not quite sure what you yourself do on Halloween, but I'd be interested. You have any plans? I'm just kind of curious before we take off for the night.
I will just spend time with my family and just have a good time, enjoy a nice meal, and just catch up with them and go visit other family members. So it'll just be like a social environment for me to catch up with family and friends. And I pray to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala that He protects you, my brother. He protects you. He destroys your enemies, protects your son, all that you hold near and dear, knowing that good is always destined to win. And those that are listening to us, you see how much we were under attack tonight and why you need to support Brother Douglas Dietrich. I will put all of the links in description in terms of the resources that he mentioned pertaining to this subject, plus links to his channel, which I'll be back on his show mid-November, Wednesdays and Sundays, 8 p.m. Eastern Time and 5 p.m. Pacific Time. Please support him. Please pray for him. Send him financial help. And do what you can, because supporting Douglas Dietrich is a fight against the cults of the kings of Edom, which he has suffered dealing with his whole life to a very personal cost to his own. If you really take the time to study his story and the things that he's been through. So my love is always with my brother Douglas. May Allah continue to bless him, protect him, and make everything go good for the cause of humanity, always prevailing over the cults of the kings of Edom, who are destined to be destroyed and lose. And we will cover these future topics with part 5, 6, 7. So in future dialogues that I will have with my brother. And I give my love to all of you. Thank you. Assalamu alaikum. Peace be upon you and yours.
And, you know, after that wonderful close, I hesitate to do this, but keep talking for a few minutes. I want to bring up a few other things to people, just a final kind of shall we say, a bit of advice so they can get a better hold of the situation, a better grasp on it. But give me a few minutes to get there. Yeah, and while I'm kind of going through some notes, I'm looking for a specific statistic here. While I'm doing that, you might help me out by just bringing up some, you know, further memories of your own, considering a little this kind of topic. Keep us on topic, bring up something else. And
yeah, what I noticed, like what Brother Douglas described, especially him working the suicide hotline, how every other person was complaining about being satanically ritually abused. And it's so interesting because it's such a tragedy in this country that I see, where even like the local schools and colleges that I went through, And I noticed that, like there was this pattern. Something didn't seem right with a lot of these men and women who were supposedly traumatized. They were having hard time maintaining personal relationships, and not just a woman with a man or a man with a woman, but even with their own family members, where they would isolate themselves, where they would believe everybody was out there to get them, and other events where they would be experiencing moments of ups, downs, hypersexuality, jumping from different relations. And it's interesting, Brother Douglas has educated me on this topic, because now the individuals that I saw, knowing something was not right with them, that it fits the bill exactly, that this was what was going on with them, where even if somebody offered them to marriage and settle down with them, they would cry, have a nervous breakdown, and say, I'm traumatized. Or supposedly they would have a alter where their personality would kind of switch overnight or in a matter of seconds. So what Brother Douglas describes helps me realize the individuals that I had observed in my high school and college years, knowing that that's exactly what was going on with them. But it's like he said, that there are with this occult complex, it's the reason why these psychiatrics refuse to treat these cases, because they know the enemy already has a plan in motion to counteract against their treatment. And this is why we're not taught about this. I took Psychology 101 in college, and I took it in high school as well. We're taught about all of these disorders, these mental illnesses, why things happen the way that they do, and the Pavlov's theories and all that stuff. But why are we not taught about SRA or satanic ritual abuse? Or why in our history books we are not taught the truth about World War II, about the Roswell deception? Why aren't we taught the truth of these things? And that's the importance why I will always support Douglas Dietrich no matter what happens, because he's on the side of truth. And those that are on the side of truth, Allah says in the Holy Quran that those who are in the aspects of truth, or the greater jihad, the greater struggle for yourself to improve your personal flaws and improve your character on a daily basis, and to support those who are fighting against evil, where even the Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, sallallahu alaihi wasallam, said that, O mankind, be aware of the deserter and forsaker, the shaitan al-Qatulu. So my faith is already teaching me to fight against the cultists of the kings of Edom, from the Prophet, peace be upon him, and from the Creator, Allah. So me supporting Brother Douglas is part of me honoring my faith. And that's exactly what it is. We have to identify who's who, what's what, and the aspect of good and evil being part of that same cosmic design, where everyone likes to blame Iblis, but not realize that it's all part of the grand design by the Creator, Allah. And what we're dealing with is something totally separate that wants to destroy it all. And those are the cultists that we have to fight against. And you can fight against those cultists. And as you see with Brother Douglas's transmissions, as soon as he comes on, there's like 12 to 20 dislikes immediately.
Yes.
And that's when you know.
And then they get filtered out. They get filtered out by the YouTube aggregate usually as the show progresses. So if anybody wants to see it in action, and Salman Sheikh, what he's bringing up, I hate to interrupt there, but this is the important point to be made. One of them is that if anybody really wants to see the enemy in action, right before their very eyes, tune in to me right at the beginning of each and every transmission, 8 p.m. Eastern Daylight Time, soon to be 8 p.m. Eastern Standard Time when we go back off wartime on Sunday, the 7th of November. And at 2 a.m. in the morning, don't forget to wind your clocks back an hour. And that'll be 2 a.m. Sunday, the 7th of December of November that we do that. And when we're back on Eastern Standard Time, I'll be on at 8 p.m. Eastern and 5 p.m. Pacific. And the same way when we're on daylight time. If you tune in at right that moment, the moment I start transmission, you'll see us hit by 250 downvotes. 15 to 250 downvotes, and you'll see the YouTube aggregator filter them out as the show progresses within a comparatively short period of time. Usually, for a while there, you'll see them match every upvote. They'll get down to a point where it balances out, and every time somebody puts an upvote up, they'll put a downvote down. and then eventually the YouTube filters it all out within. You'll see all this happen within the opening hour generally, and it can progress throughout the show to a lesser extent, more of a trickle as the downvotes continue to disappear, usually. But that way you can see it with your own eyes, and unless you see it, you're not going to believe it. But seeing is believing, and guaranteed you'll see it. That's what's been going on. Past being prelude, it will continue. Hopefully it doesn't, and eventually they stop it, but you'd think they'd stop fucking over somebody like Rocco when he's at the bottom, but they just keep doing it. They can't help themselves. As our man Salman Sheikh said, it's in their nature. They can't stop. So the point I wanted to make, and this will bring us back to the point of it all, understand that at the height of the Vietnam War, at the height of the Vietnam conflict, circa 1968, 3 million men were regionally in theater. They were in country, Vietnam, or in its environs. And that's like aircraft carriers off the shore and shit. But in every American census, 30 million men claim to have been in Vietnam. So you had 3 million men at the height of the Vietnam conflict in environs of the theater of war. In every American census that they hold, 30 million men, 10 times that number, claim to be Vietnam veterans. From that draft year alone, 1968. Now, based on those dichotomies, 90% of all American men who claim to be Vietnam veterans are lying.
Yes.
That's a fact. But because of what I know about records manipulation, I'd be generous, and I'd say maybe about 75 to 80%. Such being said, such being placed out there, what I'll tell you is that how do you tell the real Vietnam veterans from the liars? Guaranteed, the real Vietnam veterans are homeless and unemployable and completely insane and unable to say that they were a Vietnam veteran from any position of comfort. So, you know, if somebody is employed, has a clean criminal record, and is a family man, and living a life of stability in any sense of equilibrium, and they say they're a Vietnam veteran, you know they're a goddamn liar. That's how you tell. So when it comes to these people who say they're a victim of satanic ritual abuse, you know that they are a member of the cult of Kings of Edom, and they're out to insinuate themselves into your life via that angle, when they're not in the shape of Penny Bradley or Rocco Fowler, completely socially alienated and rejected and unemployable. Those are the real ones that are no longer or never were members of the cults of the Kings of Edom, but rather just victims. Those who converted through their victimhood into perpetrators to continue the cycle of violence are the ones who are obviously socially adjusted and adapted. That's what you need to know. The other point is that this is a war of remembrance. The enemy has made it all about, quote unquote, false memory. So since this is a war of remembrance, understand that there is a false memory syndrome. It is your false memory that you won World War II and that Japan lost. So if you want to overcome and struggle against this real memory syndrome of ritual abuse, this is why you have to buy the book, The Roswell Deception and the Demystification of World War II, because that cures you of the false memory syndrome of Japan losing the war and America winning it. And then that's part of the same battle. It's all part of the same war, and it's your war, and you have to fight it. And one way you can find it, and I'll close it with this, and our man Salman will close it more formally after that, And he already did so. Really, this is kind of like a postscript. He already closed it beautifully. This is just a postscript. The first thing that you have to do is we have to stop using the term satanic ritual abuse, because it's not Satan. It's not Lucifer. It's not Tavush Maliek, the peacock angel. It is the kings of Edom. So for that reason, we have to use the term SRA as an acronym for sadistic ritual abuse. This is sadistic ritual abuse is the term that we're going to introduce to the public here and now, so that we can bring this back onto the table as an argument and force people to confront the phenomenon without Satan being involved.
Yes.
Because here, Satan is innocent. Sadistic ritual abuse from this point forward. And having introduced that, my love to Brother Salman Sheikh and my gratitude he will come back as the Islamo chaplain, or rather return to his responsibilities as the Islamo chaplain within next month.
Yes, Brother Douglas, and inshallah, God willing, I look forward to being back on Critical Omissions in mid-November. And for all those that are listening, I will put all of the links in the description below. And what Brother Douglas is saying about Satan not being the enemy is absolutely true, because there is a Sufi story where the Prophet Musa, Moses, peace be upon him, basically interacts with Iblis and says, "Oh, Iblis, why did you disobey Allah when he told you to bow before Adam?" And he tells, "Oh, Musa, I still love Allah and I'm still serving him as part of this divine matrix of creation." So, and how we're warned about the forsaker and the deserter al-Qatulu by the Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him. So the Islamic teachings are already telling me, and Brother Douglas is already confirming everything for me about that the real enemy are these cultists of the kings of Edom and their alien gods, who want to come here and destroy it all, rather than let the balance of Allah, the Creator, balance everything out by itself. And my love and blessings and prayers are always with him. May Allah continue to bless my brother Douglas, his son, all that he loves near and dear to his heart. And I look forward to being back on his show. And I bid you all farewell with the greeting of Assalamu alaikum. Peace be upon you and yours.
Thank you. That was beautiful. I'll hang up now. Good night.